16 years old, it was 1963. You opened up Newsweek magazine and you saw your name. What was it like?
Well, one of my first publications, a letter about Amelia Earhart, who I had been doing a research project on for about 3 years at that point. It was just after the first Soviet cosmonaut went up, Valentina Tereshkova, and I was indignant that no American woman was eligible yet for the space program. As it happened, coincidentally, that the first woman had gone to space 35 years to the day since Amelia Earhart had crossed the Atlantic. So I wrote into Newsweek, and they published it. Now this is before Betty Friedan's book was out. It's before feminism had its resurgence of the 1960s. So this is one of the documentary proof, 40 years old now this year, that I'm a kind of an ur-feminist, one of the aboriginal feminists of my generation of the 1960s.
Fast forward to 1972. You're traveling and touring with your mother in Washington, D.C. You're watching on the Senate floor and you see Barry Goldwater for the first time in person. Mm-hmm. What did you think of him?
A man of amazing charisma. He had a kind of a quality, almost a kind of, I don't know what to call it, kind of a medieval warrior quality. I mean, I think he impressed me as an intellectual somehow. He radiated a kind of mental force, even from this great distance from the visitors' gallery.
Do you remember whether he ever had any impact on you? Did the fact that he was a Republican and where you were moving in your political life at that time?
Well, I had been campaigning for John Kennedy in 1960 when I was 13 years old, but I come from an area of upstate New York that's very conservative, very Republican. A lot of my family was, I would say, on the conservative side. On the whole, Republicans, I think, is the family I came from.
You've talked about the fact that you're very unhappy with the labels of conservative and liberal these days. Why? I
tried. Oh, it seems just hopeless now, but for a brief shining moment in the early 90s, it really seemed as if we were going to move into a new arena where there were less inflexible polarizations about politics. I feel that these designations, conservative and liberal, have long outlived their usefulness, but I'm afraid that the Monica Lewinsky affair repolarized the nation, and now at this point, with so much disagreement about the Iraq War, I think we're back to some of the worst and most strident kind of a discourse where the nation is divided down the middle in ways that I think will take decades to heal.
Is it possible, though, for us not to put labels on people?
I would like more sophisticated forms of labeling. I mean, if someone wants to call themselves a rock-ribbed conservative Republican, that's fine. But I myself am I'm a libertarian who disagrees with the Democratic Party that I belong to on so many levels. I despise the current direction of the Democratic Party. I could go on for hours about that.
But you voted for Bill Clinton twice.
I voted for Bill Clinton twice, and then became a severe critic of the Clintons, and then voted for Ralph Nader for the Green Party. And I'm hoping some Democrat will come to be an adequate presidential candidate. It doesn't look like we're going to get anyone at the present moment. But at the same time, I find that the Democratic Party has run out of ideas itself. I mean, its version of liberalism is nothing but taglines and a kind of diminution of the Republican or conservative position that I think is reductive and is just causing an endless inflammatory culture war in this country.
Flashback, 37 years, okay. You're 10 years old, mm-hmm. And it says in some of the articles about you that you came out. You were a very quiet child, which some people watching this might be very surprised to hear. A quiet child, Camille Paglia?
Yes, I think I was fairly silent. I was very active. I had a lot of physical energy, and I was always roaming around wildly outdoors. But I remember once my mother was bringing me down to New York City for a visit on the train, and she was complimented by other train riders for the incredible good manners. This little girl wearing white gloves, and so on. Then I sort of exploded. By puberty, I exploded. But it's a classic story of the 1960s generation that I belong to.
We have some pictures here of you and some of your Halloween costumes of youth, maybe a little unusual.
Highly unusual in the middle of the 1950s for little girls to be disguising themselves and as military officers. In this case, a Roman soldier. My mother and my father constructed that costume for me. They would have preferred that I had chosen something else to be, some other sexual persona to be. But I was madly in love with these images of heroic masculinity at a time when, you know, Doris Day and Debbie Reynolds were being foisted on us women. Now that's me as the Toreador Escamillo from Carmen. I'm probably 6 years old there. And again, my mother and father constructed that costume. We had no sword, so that's my mother's umbrella, actually, that I have there. We're living in a small farming town of Oxford, New York at that moment, where my father was teaching high school.
But where did these ideas come from for you to do this?
I have no idea. There's something's been surging in me since a tiny child. Here I'm Hamlet. There, that is, at this point we're in Syracuse. This is probably, I'm 8 or 9 years old at this point. I'd actually produced and directed a rather shabby production of Hamlet based on the classics comic books in my 4th grade class.
Was it good? Was it any good?
No, no. The Hamlet, I'm afraid, kept forgetting his lines, and so it was kind of a fiasco.
And where are you here? We're fast forwarding a little bit. You're going to see this photo.
Okay.
Here you go.
All right.
Can you see that?
Now that's it. I'm in the classroom at my first job at Bennington College. That's 1973. I have my Keith Richards shag haircut on. Keith Richards is an enormous idol of mine from the Rolling Stones. I'm wearing my Edwardian cut green corduroy jacket, my trademark in that era.
When did you first decide that you were unhappy with the way that people express themselves through their gender?
In the 1950s, it was a time of great repression in terms of sex roles. There was a very definite way that a girl was supposed to be. I think that, well, my father encouraged me to aspire to whatever I wanted to do. He taught me how to defend myself, you know, with my fists, if necessary. So my father did not raise me in I think the conventional way you'd expect in an Italian-American immigrant family, as mine was. But there was something in me which just wanted to achieve for women. I was constantly indignant about the role, seemed to me, you know, subordinate role, deferential role that was assigned to women, especially the need to be polite. I liked the way, you know, men could speak out, men could be challenging, but that women were expected to have soft, feminine voices, that kind of a thing. So it was just a constant clash with gender roles throughout the 1950s for me. That's why I identify very strongly with the transgender of today. I absolutely understand what they went through. On the other hand, I never had any desire to change sex. I've expressed my my problems with socialization through achievement, through writing. I think my books are in some way my own form of sex change.
Well, that's what we're here all about to talk about, and that is to talk about your books. What is it about you have said that the picture is very important for you in terms of explaining your views to people. But what is it about the written word? Is that more important, less important than the picture? And what's your thought on that?
Well, I feel I'm in love with the English language, which is new to my family. It has to be remembered. My mother was born in Italy, and all 4 of my grandparents. So English is new. And my parents made the decision to have English spoken only in the homes, and that's why I oppose bilingual education. I believe in immersion in English, which is a very difficult language. So I've been in love with English. I've heard, for example, Lewis Carroll's Alice books. I remember hearing those voices, those British voices actually, and being fascinated by mysterious, almost kind of imperious statements coming out of the characters of Alice's world, and wondering what they meant, and wanting to speak like that. So I feel I've been studying English as if from the outside my entire life. I'm always taking notes on English, always looking up words, always assembling materials that have to do with English. Now, I'm also in love with the image, and that I knew from the Italian Catholic Church, St. Anthony of Padua Church in Endicott, New York, which was all the stained glass windows and the statues of St. Michael and St. Lucy. The iconic form of almost choreographic expression of the saints of the Catholic Church with their weapons or their emblems. St. Lucy holding out a plate with eyeballs on it. I found that very, very odd, very interesting. So my whole interest in Hollywood, actually, and in dancers and in actors is coming from what I perceived as the ritualism and the gorgeous iconography of the Catholic Church. So in my career, I've tried to blend these two things: my love of language with my love of the image.
Who taught you how to write?
I don't think anyone taught me how to write. I think I taught myself how to write by whenever I would find a passage that struck me as unusually eloquent or interesting, I would copy it out. Now, just that muscular copying. I did that for years, ever since I've been in probably junior high school, copying out passages, keeping notebooks of passages, and that copying through and trying to understand the way the sentence works. So all of the different voices in English actually are in my writing. I don't have one voice. People think that, I certainly have a recognizable voice when I'm speaking, but not when I'm writing. There are probably 100 different voices that I have, or I'm imitating or combining in a kind of improvisational manner the writers I particularly admired over the years.
So what was the impetus for this first book? 1990 hardback, 1991 paperback out of Yale.
Sexual Personae is an expansion of my doctoral dissertation at Yale. I got my degree in 1974, and probably it was Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, which a Belgian colleague of my father's had given me in 1963, and that is when I transferred my interest. Before that, I wanted to be an archaeologist, or I was thinking of perhaps going into literary studies, but this idea of producing a mammoth book, something that could be a monument for, in terms of women's achievement. I felt that women did not aim high enough. I wanted to do something massive, for women, by women. I wanted to do something crushing, okay, on a kind of grand scale. I feel that men have, for too long in history, been the ones to make the epic statements, or in rock and roll, I'm always complaining. Why is it Led Zeppelin, who are geniuses, who had that giant orchestral sound? Why is it that women will not make this big, obnoxious, like sort of almost like a military tank way of crushing the audience? So that's what I wanted to do, to produce a massive book. And that's only half of the book I actually wrote, Sexual Personae. There's a second volume that was on popular culture. It was thousands of pages long, this manuscript, and I'm very grateful to Yale Press for having taken a chance on it when 7 other publishers had rejected it.
And is that when Harold Bloom came into your life?
Well, Harold Bloom was my dissertation director in graduate school. I had not studied with him at the Yale Graduate School, but he heard through the student grapevine what I was intending to work on, which is this area of sexual ambiguity and moral ambiguity in the whole history of the humanities. He summoned me to his office, and he said to me, "My dear, I am the only one who can direct that dissertation." Okay, I said, "Oh, okay." And there began one of the great, it seems to me, collaborations. I owe Harold Bloom so much just for believing in my ideas, understanding everything I wanted to do, and being my support through all those years when no one understood. There are a couple of my friends, I think, understood what I was going to do, but no one else did. And to produce that book in the face of massive rejection of everything I ever wrote in terms of the pieces of the book, it just took a level of persistence or mania, I don't know, that I think few women have.
March 1991. What was the impact of this cover story on the New Yorker?
Well, my book, Sexual Personae, had been out a year earlier without my picture on it, with no publicity. No one knew who I was. I was completely unknown, working at an obscure art school in Philadelphia, the University of the Arts. And Francesca Stanfill, who is a very sophisticated woman, a writer and journalist in New York, was interested in Sexual Personae for its defense of art. She felt that, as I did, that too much of feminism and academic style was suppressing the aesthetic qualities in art. So she was attracted to my book, and then sought me out, and it ended up as this cover story where people saw me for the first time. Now, on that cover, I am posing with my Keith Richards face. That's the one that, and that's in the armor room of the Philadelphia Museum of Art.
People see right here, there's armor right in back.
Yes, which is my military, my Halloween costume background, you see, is there. So there I was, and I was taking positions that at the time were highly controversial in feminism. But now, practically all of my ideas are part of the cultural landscape, thanks to a younger generation of women that came through who agreed with me. I was taking a pro-sex, pro-pop, pro-rock position about feminism. I was saying women are not victims, all kinds of things now that people just accept. But at the time, it created a storm of controversy.
What were you saying about Gloria Steinem at this time?
Well, Gloria Steinem, I admired Gloria Steinem. When she first came on the scene, I thought that she was a very good, a very telegenic face for feminism, but she had been dragged into the movement by Betty Friedan. For heaven's sakes, I was out there doing my Amelia Earhart crazy things in the early 60s, while Gloria Steinem was running around New York in a plastic dress, doing a book called The Beach Book, at that period. So I don't owe anything to Gloria Steinem. I'm saying that feminism, as it cohered its ideology in the 1970s, turned against sex, turned against men, became, for example, Gloria Steinem said, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. All right. Now, at the same time as she was never seen without a man in parties in New York, I found that I thought it was appalling to indoctrinate young women, to inoculate young women with an anti-male bias. I come out of an Italian culture of strong men and strong women. The Italian men were fabulous. The men could do everything of every generation, right? From my grandfather's generation, my uncles, and my father's generation, do anything with their hands. Right? They were men of honor, okay, men of ethics. Okay, to have men being impugned as racist and oppressors and imperialists and brutalizers and rapists and everything else seemed to me a terrible way to educate women.
And what was the backlash like when you were saying this stuff publicly in front of the feminists?
Well, in the early 90s, it was people who were there will remember, for example, at Brown University in 1992, 700 people turned out. I mean, probably half of them wondered who I was, and the screaming and the yelling that went on. Now, the reason, up to this point, such crowds to harass the speaker, they had worked on people. It didn't work with me because because I am a performer. Okay, I do improv. So I wasn't up there reading some prepared text that they could disrupt. Okay, they would throw things from the audience, right, and I would go right back at them. I used things drawn from films I had seen, all kinds of things, and I kept the audience laughing. And in fact, there was probably the most famous one is when I gave a lecture at MIT in 1991, and the Boston police had to be called out. Thousands of people turned out. People who were tired of the political correctness of the 1980s and wanted something new. Because what I stand for is, I stand for anti-dogma, anti-ideology, a free mind and a free voice. That's what I stand for. I am not a part of any group. I don't belong to any circle whose ideology I'm trying to put forward.
You have said that probably the most notorious sentence that you have ever written is this one: if civilization had been left in female hands, we would still be living in grass huts. Is that a slap in the face to women?
No, what I'm saying is that that women have been close to nature, have had a kind of ecological view of nature, perhaps, from the very beginning, and that we would still be living in grass huts, meaning we would be in dwellings made of perishable materials organized around the hearth. Okay, you see, because the grass hut is organized around the hearth. That the whole impulse toward building in stone, toward breaking through the barriers, the boundary lines of the tribe, of the extended family, actually is coming from men. Men like force themselves out there and die, or even slaughter. I think that it's men who have caused the great migrations in human history that have expanded the range of the species. They're the ones who are always building the great bridges and building the great monuments, taking terrible physical risks. And so I think that throughout history you've had this kind of magnetic symbolism of the hearth that is associated with women, and I think it seems quite natural. Women, when they're pregnant or when they're nursing babies, need to be still. You can have. I identified with the Amazons. The Amazons, with their bows and arrows, who ran with the men, who went out with the hunting expeditions and brought back the meat and did all the dirty work.
1990 again. This would have been the year that the Sexual Personae came out in hardback. You were writing in the New York Times.
Yes.
About Madonna.
Yes. Okay, yeah.
And you wrote that she was the future of feminism.
That was the first op-ed piece I wrote was this defense of Madonna at the end of 1990. That was like the first thing where people realized also kind of who I was. And at the end of that article, I said, Madonna is the future of feminism. Now this was in 1990. People said, this is completely mad. Feminists wrote in it, this is terrible, this is awful, she prostitutes the image of women, etc. But it turned out to be accurate, because a whole younger generation of women came forward, influenced by Madonna, who embraced their sexuality, embraced fashion and beauty, and threw out all that anti-male, anti-pornography kind of obsession of the 1980s feminism of Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon. So now, when I was saying in the early 1990s that Charlie's Angels had been to me part of the cutting edge of feminism moving forward, people thought I was mad. Or the Bond girls. I loved the James Bond girls, who feminism normally thought of as sexist. Well, here we are, after over a decade later, and Charlie's Angels is in remakes. We've been two movies that Drew Barrymore has put out, with them. The Bond girls have documentaries about them on cable TV. So I feel as if I just feel it's like a paradise. All of the issues that people were trying to lynch me for in the early 1990s, those arguments are over, and the younger women have won.
Have they also won in that issue where you wrote in Newsday in 1991 about date rape? You said the date rape controversy shows feminism hitting the wall of its own broken promises.
Right. Now, my essay for Newsday, early 1991, is probably one of my most reproduced pieces of writing.
And you have it in, I should say, in Sex, Art, and American Culture, which was your book from 1992.
Yes, my essay collection. Now, that is today. It's in college readers. It's in composition texts. And the reason for that is that teachers have found that it stimulates discussion among the students. What I'm saying in that article is that women must take responsibility if they are emancipated for their own behavior in social relationships, that we have to get beyond the period of the chaperone, the duenna, of the avenging male figures, the brother who will come and punch out your date for you. I found that the feminism of the 80s and early 90s was asking male authority figures back into sex, that this running to the authority figure, come and punish him for what he did on the date. I felt that a strong woman should be prepared to negotiate her own social relationships and be ready to defend herself. And I said, for example, about Madonna, I said, if you're going to dress like Madonna, you have every right to dress like Madonna. But if you're going to dress like Madonna at 3 a.m., okay, you're advertising, you better be ready to sell. This is the point I'm making, that the way you dress and the way you behave is actually there are these subliminal messages that are below the level of yes or no in sexual relationships. So I'm saying to women, do not put yourself into positions from which you have to be rescued. Okay? Again, free women must be ready to defend themselves. Now that at the time was a radical view, but now, again, I think that it's seen as the sensible view.
And do you feel that today? Are you ready to, when you go out, to support yourself, to defend yourself even physically?
Well, I feel that no one has the right to put his or her hand on you without your permission, okay? And that you are the total ruler of your own body. If you say no at any stage in any sex act, the person must stop. Nevertheless, there are very crazy people out there. There are people who are just mentally disturbed. I always say, like Ted Bundy, the rape murderer, okay, was an extraordinarily charming man. That's the problem today with all this sort of stranger dating. Women should not be putting themselves under the control of strangers. So women, have to be aware that with freedom, with modern emancipation, come responsibilities.
Camille Paglia has decided to be with us for 3 hours this afternoon. We thank her for that. And we're going to open up our phone lines and invite you to join us. Here's how you can join in. 202-585-3890 if you live in the East or Central Time Zone. 202-585-3891 if you live in the Mountain or Pacific Time Zone. You can also email a question if you would prefer to do it that way. And the address is booktv@cspan.org. Again, that's booktv@cspan.org. And some people have already emailed in questions. I'm just going to dig into them. This first one by Anne Marie McMahon from the Catholic University. She's a major in music history and literature. Asks what your take is on Ann Coulter.
Ann Coulter. Well, I think Ann Coulter is I think she has a brilliant mind. I love to watch her trash all those genteel ladies on the on network TV when she goes on. She's uncontainable. On the other hand, I do feel that she should take more time with her written materials. I think that there's an inflammatory and perhaps I'm afraid sometimes careless way that the books have been assembled that have allowed her opponents to criticize her and dismiss her work. So I wish that she, actually I wish that she were a college teacher. I mean, I wish that she were more part of the institutional setting.
This email question asks you, what do you think? Do you think that Hillary Clinton will ever be president?
I don't, but I hope that Hillary will run. My history with Hillary is a long one. I was sitting on the Phil Donahue show in 1992 debating Susan Faludi on the very day that Hillary on the campaign trail made her infamous remark, well, I could have stayed home and ate cookies, okay, and so on. So Donahue ran this tape for us, and it was the only thing that Susan Faludi and I agreed on. We both admired Hillary very much. We thought this is fabulous. So a woman of the 1960s generation, and you know, I voted for the Clintons and so on. Then I became so disillusioned with the Clintons and wrote a notorious cover story for the New Republic in 1996 called Ice Queen, Drag Queen that created an enormous storm. Okay, there. And then slowly, I think many liberals came to my view, became more suspicious of Hillary. But I had a turnaround when I reviewed her new book for the Times in London recently, and I felt that it was a credible statement that of the continuity of her thinking about social policy from long before she met Bill Clinton. I felt that even if she, you know, I could hear her voice in it, even if others helped her with the book, I thought, this is a woman who knows how to hire a good staff, because that is a well put together book. Now that book is selling and selling, and a book like that doesn't just sell through PR, it's selling through word of mouth. Some people are enjoying the book and the pictures. So she needs to run, but I would prefer a Dianne Feinstein, okay, who is running. I admire Dianne Feinstein. She's mature, she's articulate, she's steady, she is deeply informed in intelligence issues about, you know, security issues and so on. I do wish she were running for president.
Now, you did say in a Newsday quote, this is maybe more about Bill Clinton than Hillary Clinton, anyone who stays married to an infantile, drooling, serial groper deserves what she gets.
Yes, and by that I mean, I don't care about their marriage. I really don't care whether Hillary stays married to Bill or not. That's irrelevant to me. I believe in private behavior in the private realm, but then the public realm is where women need to achieve. So I don't care what goes on. I don't care if the crockery is flying, lamps are flying. I don't care. Okay, I'm just concerned about Hillary's behavior in the public realm. Now here, I have to say, you know, I want her to not be so insulated by the, you know, the security guards and a PR. She's like always rolling like Evita Peron in this kind of a cocoon, and she doesn't really engage with the people. I think that's what she's missing. That's why I just fail to see how she's going to win many primaries aside from the Northeast and the West Coast. So she doesn't have the experience of just going out in that grueling way on the campaign trail and mingling with people in an improvisational manner.
Well, you don't have a security guard, but how do you guard your own privacy?
I am an extremely private person. I mean, people may see me on TV occasionally, okay, but I absolutely value my privacy above all. I'm not out. I don't schmooze. I'm not out at, you know, at fancy events, movie premieres. I'm always being invited to all kinds of things. I don't go there. I try to preserve. I feel I'm a thinker and a writer and a teacher, and I need to preserve my inner rhythms. You know, I live in the suburbs. I work downtown Philadelphia, but I live in the suburbs. I must have trees. You know, I feel like an ordinary person. I go to the shopping mall. I want to preserve that sense of ordinariness and always be responding to life as it occurs. Okay.
Many of our writers have allowed us in to show our viewers where they write as a way of explaining to them. You said no. You said no because of your privacy, and you also didn't want our cameras or any cameras in where you teach.
Exactly. From the moment I became known in the media in the early 1990s, that was absolutely the line I drew. I will not let reporters into the classroom. I think that's wrong to allow your students to be made somehow props of your off-campus prominence. I think that's completely wrong. Now, if I were giving a very large lecture, that's different. Okay, then there was a large audience, that'd be quite different. But no, I've never permitted that. I think that's very important to have a zone of privacy. Oh my God, where I work, how I work, my desk. Oh my heavens, that's like sort of my soul.
But you have a website. of your fan. Your fans have a website for you.
Well, they may have created it, but I certainly don't. There are a number of them have been created over the years, and the web is just a mass of sometimes misinformation and all kinds of things. I mean, people have created sites, but I do not have my own website.
They say that's electronically stalking you. Do you feel that way?
Electronic stalking? No.
Electronic stalking?
Not at all, because I was such a part of, when I joined Salon magazine, I was writing for it from its inaugural issue on, right up until 1995 to 2001, when I left to, and I joined I'm a contributing editor now at Interview magazine. But, I feel I was part of the construction of a voice on the web for nonfiction, for magazine articles and so on. So I feel part of the pioneering quality of the web of the 1990s.
Let's get to some phone calls for you. Okay. Louisville, Kentucky is first.
Yes, Dr. Paglia, I'm a huge fan of yours, and I certainly hope that you continue your would restart your column every once in a while.
Thank you.
I've been a great fan of yours, but what I'd like to ask you is the first time I heard of you, it was like a kind of an intellectual explosion went off, and someone actually talked about sexual liberation, but not being part of the as you call it, the radical left or something. Mm. And I'd like to know, as a conservative myself and someone who's sexual liberation, how do we convince these people to be to understand that the two are possibly compatible?
Conservatism and sexual liberation? Well, I have detailed my philosophy in a long piece called No Law in the Arena in my book Vamps and Tramps. And there I feel that there should be a strict line between the private realm and the public. And I feel that in the private realm that, the government has no right to intrude the way people conduct themselves with other individuals, as long as it's consensual behavior. I feel that the government has no business crossing that line. But in the public realm, I think that is the area where we can ask for standards. For example, Bill Clinton could have had 1,000 mistresses in 1,000,000 motels in this world. I would have applauded him. But to use the hallways off the Oval Office was a disgrace. That's the public realm. Okay, that should not be violated by private peccadillos.
Vamps and Tramps, 1994. This is what it looked like. Do you remember what it was like posing for this cover?
Well, I designed that cover. Okay, I'm using and I'm imitating. Okay, a number of things. Diana Rigg and the Avengers at that point.
That's what came to mind when I saw it. Yes.
I'm also imitating a favorite Andy Warhol picture of Elvis Presley about to draw from a holster. I actually have a knife strapped to my hip, and I have a jacket, a military jacket from the Army Navy store, surplus jacket that I'm wearing. And this is what I'm saying is, again, the free woman must be ready to make her own way in the world. That's what it's like a vision of the armed Amazon.
San Francisco.
Camille, I want to thank you for the work you're doing and for the image of feminism that you're putting out, where women can be strong and can partner with men instead of being against men.
Yes. Thank you.
The question I wanted to ask you is, could you talk about broadly what you think about sex work? As you know, prostitutes have been both stigmatized by the mainstream culture, oppressed, illegalized, and also have been made villains and victims by the feminists, some feminists.
Well, in my writing, I've taken a strong position of defense of prostitutes, of strippers, of drag queens. In fact, the title of my book, Vamps and Tramps, is an allusion to this aspect. I feel that you see that Western culture is actually a fusion of two traditions: the Judeo-Christian, which is, I'm afraid, often rather anti-sex in many of its incarnations, and the Greco-Roman, going all the way back actually to ancient Babylon. So what the Bible condemns as Babylonian sexuality, I have celebrated in my own work. Now, I don't think that that prostitutes should be soliciting in the doorways of schools or churches or things like that. I think there's room for questions of public order. But again, I am proud to say that I support prostitutes and have a feeling of solidarity with them.
So Daniel Lewis from Washington, D.C. asked this in an email question: sex and sexuality has always had a role in American politics. How in your view is our time different from others? So I guess bringing the sexuality issue back to politics.
Well, we had this enormous explosion of the sexual revolution in the 1960s, and in the entire decade just went madly out of control. So that there was a conservative reaction by the end of the decade in Richard Nixon's election. So then, what happened is that you would think that the progressive or liberal side of the sexual equation, feminism and so on, would take up the flag. Instead, there was an odd kind of a fusion between a doctrinaire feminism of Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon with conservatives to drive, for example, Playboy and Penthouse out of the convenience stores, and Dworkin and her people tried to pass laws that were later declared, local ordinances that were later declared unconstitutional. There were all kinds of statements that pornography causes rape, things like that, which I think have absolutely never been proven. So again, we keep on getting this strange eruption of our Aboriginal Puritanism again and again. Even though the country itself is geographically so much larger, the New England Puritan tradition seems to return again and again. And so that our arguments about sex, particularly sex as it applies to politics, seem rather naive and idealistic to Europeans who don't care at all what politicians do in their private hours. So I think that the Puritan influence is also, though it's positive in terms of the way we work hard in America. There's a sense of rigor, self-discipline, of independence and free thought. That also was the Puritan influence. So I'm afraid it's built into our character. I don't see how we're ever going to escape it.
Does that whole issue of gay marriage, which has come up most recently, play into what
I'm on the record on this question of gay marriage since the early 1990s, and I speak about it also in No Law in the Arena in Vamps and Tramps. And I feel that that it's a mistake ever to use the word marriage for that. Marriage is a word that's associated with the sacraments of the church, going back to Latin. The word marriage descends from the Latin. And why gay activists have inflamed the situation further with this by using that word. I prefer the idea of domestic partnership or civil union. I feel that what needs to be investigated is any special benefit given to heterosexual married couples that would not be given to unmarried heterosexual couples who are life partners, and also homosexual partners. I think that's what we need. We need the state and church must be separated. Wherever we have any kind of intrusion of religious assumptions in government process, I believe they have to be removed. And that is in fact the thrust of the last 250 years of the development of the modern democracies.
Has that played out in your own life too? I guess the question is, in your own life, have you had times in your own relationship in which you felt like...
Well, I've been with Alison Maddox for 10 years now, and we've discussed this. I think if what we have registered as domestic partners.
You have.
Okay, I'm lucky enough that my university offers that. There aren't that many benefits that accrue to it, but I do think there are things. I mean, this business about at the living wills or being excluded from the room at the hospital or property. It's absurd protest that any gays are making, because you can make your own will and make sure that all these things are taken care of. However, in cases of Social Security, let's say, where Social Security does not transfer to a homosexual partner, that really needs to be looked at in terms of past precedent. And may I take this opportunity? Sure. To say that a scoop for C-SPAN, our family expanded last year. Alison gave birth to a son, Lucian. I have kept this completely out of the media very successfully. He'll be a year old this fall, and scoop for C-SPAN.
What has that done to you?
Well, it's been great. It's just been incredible. I mean, it's been quite amazing. Quite an amazing.
How do you plan on bringing him up?
Well, I hope as a free thinker. Alison is a free thinker, as I am, and she's an artist and independent arts curator. In fact, she had a very productive year last year. She produced a book called Sex in the City, an illustrated history of sex in New York, and I wrote the introduction to that called American Babylon, where I show all the very eerie kind of resemblances between Manhattan and the Babylon of antiquity that now has come back into the news so much because of our incursion into Iraq.
Let's go to Bowie, Maryland.
Yes. First, I respect the speaker there, and I have two quick points. First, on feminism, I think there's a split between what I would say were the reform and the revolution. Reform was just, get rid of the bad, degrading treatment and the abuse. But they basically accept secondary treatment, you know, the chivalrous type thing. And then there's the revolution who really want true equality. And to me, sadly, I think there's not very many women who really want to be equal, and I want your thought on that. But my main point is about a liberal. I consider myself a liberal and am able to criticize anyone and really bring new thought. And I want to know, do you have a problem with the definitions? Because most people that are referred to as liberal Democrats, they're really leftists who are conservative, meaning that they have an agenda, just as, say, Tom DeLay is a religious person, and he takes his worldview and tries to fit the facts to that. There's plenty leftists who take their worldview and try to fit the facts, whereas to me, a liberal is someone who looks at all the facts and is informed by as many responsible sources as possible and then tries to do what's best for as many people as possible. And to me, that's what a liberal is, as opposed to a conservative who says, well, what does the Bible say? Well, that's my view. And I was just wondering, can there be a better, is there a group for what I'm talking about, or am I destined to be called a liberal even though I don't support the teachers union? I don't, you know, people say you support the teachers union. You know, there's a list that they call liberal when they're really just left, you know, they're on the left.
Bui, thank you.
Yeah, well, there was so much in there, and so many. Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways the liberal wing of the Democratic Party has become a hostage to special interest groups and of the teachers' union and everything else. That is a serious problem. But I think in general, one can say that the conservative is someone who looks backward to a time when things were better, when a time of the forebears, when where there were bedrock traditional values that we need to return to. Whereas a liberal is generally looking forward and thinking how to remake society. So the liberal, for example, will see the Constitution as more malleable, as a document that is in evolution, that needs to be constantly revised from century to century. Whereas a conservative will say, oh, this is what the founders envisioned, and we must not, and they in their wisdom, must not be deviated from. But right now, I think all these terms are kind of a terrible muddle. When I came on the scene in the early 90s, it was the PC era, the political correctness. Was entrenched in the major media were utterly hostage to it. There was a kind of doctrinaire liberalism that was quite automatic at that period, and also in the university campuses. And then over the period of the 90s, it's almost reversed. So at the beginning of the 90s, I think conservatives, younger conservatives in particular, had a tremendous intellectual kind of alertness because they were attacking all these old dinosaur-like precepts of liberalism that were now had no connection to contemporary life. But now it's almost kind of reversed. I think that the word liberal is starting to come back again and to perhaps be rejuvenated for just what the caller said, to bring it back to its old idea of someone who is open-minded, future-looking, right? But I don't want to abandon either one. I think we have to build on the great things of the past, but always with the sense that that society is a human creation. It is an organism itself, and it should constantly be revised and not allowed to ossify or to calcify.
Crescent City, California.
Hello, Mrs. Paglia. I really want to express my admiration for your intellectual integrity and your adherence to rigorous academic scholarship.
Thank you.
Scholarship.
Thank you.
This is so refreshing and so rare to have it to the degree that you have, in my opinion.
Thank you.
I would like to ask your opinion about two things, about the Professor Alan Bloom's book in the 80s called The Closing of the American Mind, whether you think it was accurate and is helpful and is still pertinent, and also what do you think of the National Association of Scholars, a group of professors organized to try to fight political correctness. Thank you so much for your efforts.
Thank you.
I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you. Well, now, Alan Bloom's book is usually thought to have inaugurated the culture wars. It's an attack on the academy and on the provincialism of American thinking and so on. I agree with Alan Bloom about the need for the selection of great works that students should be educated about. I believe there is a continuity in Western culture that too much today on campuses has been sort of thrown out the window. But there is a kind of a coldness or a kind of limitation to Alan Bloom's view of what culture consists of. I myself am much more interested in movies and media, and also the visual arts. I mean, I feel that Alan Bloom is a philosopher, and therefore there's a kind of rationalism, perhaps, in his point of view that I felt as a member of the 1960s generation is a little bit constraining, because we are the rock and roll generation that are about emotional expression. That's what I felt was needed in academia. Academia had gotten very desiccated by the time my mentor Harold Bloom was having his clashes with it as well in the late 50s and 1960s. So I think Alan Bloom deserves credit. He was an honorable man who I think did an enormous service by putting this thing on center stage for us to discuss. But at the same time, I would supplement his work or his educational model by about 59,000 other things, right? And then the second thing is
National Association of Scholars.
Thank you. The National Association of Scholars. I wish that they would. I mean, they're doing good work, but they're not as prominent yet. I don't think they're quite as publicity savvy as I wish that they were. I myself do not belong to that group. I also was disillusioned with the MLA, the Modern Language Association, and I quit it in disgust, to join the new and dissident Media Ecology Association that was founded by Professor Lance Strate, S-T-R-A-T-E, of Fordham University. And the great models of this organization are Marshall McLuhan, a great hero of mine from the 1960s, and Neil Postman of NYU, who is a severe critic of contemporary media. And media ecology is an analysis of the entire environment that we exist in. It's books and technology and radio, television, all of those things that change us, that become us. And what's going. And the whole point of this association is to find the two bases of it are Toronto and New York City, a North American vision of the media that we created. Enough with the Frankfurt School from Germany, the antediluvian thing. Enough with Lacan, Derrida, and Foucault, the French who know nothing, or Baudrillard. They know nothing about American culture, these people, okay? Now, these are the idols on campus. So people who are interested in joining this association, please look at the website. Media Ecology Association has its website, and 5 years old now and booming.
Chattanooga.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering if you have any comments on the concept of the shadow. I did not see it much in your works when I read it. And also, why do you think television hasn't been a more effective tool in the classroom? Thank you.
The shadow?
The shadow. Are you referring to the radio show?
Is that what you're referring to, caller?
I'm not sure.
Caller, you still there?
Anyway, I haven't written anything about the shadow, but television in the classroom, I'm a little bit skeptical about television in the classroom. I think that students already have too much television outside the classroom. They're raised with it. Now, I love television. I have 5 televisions in my house, and so I can go through the whole house and not miss anything. But I feel the quality of television is declining enormously. I think that what students need is much more training in the old fundamentals of how to read and write. I think that students are graduating from school these days on pablum. I mean, the graduates of the Ivy League, for heaven's sakes, are like drifting into jobs in New York City, and their general knowledge, cultural knowledge, seems to me so limited. They don't even have basic skills. So I think even spelling. I mean, things that they have to do with language. The kids know how to work the computer. They're masters of the computer, but what I'm worried about is a decline in book writing and art making. Now my university, the University of the Arts, has I've been teaching 20 years next year, has every kind of the traditional fine arts major in it, from illustration to ceramics to into new things like writing for film and TV. It's jazz, dance, acting, all kinds of things, and so on. And they also have web design and web work. And the people, my students who are in this area, are so forward-looking. The people who are working in animation also. But I'm worried about whether the next generation and following generations are going to have any interest in or patience with the artifact of the book, the artifact of the painting or the freestanding sculpture. I'm afraid we're heading for a kind of cultural wasteland if education does not get back to basics, okay, and agree about a certain line, the historical line of West. And I don't just believe in Western culture being taught. I am a multiculturalist insofar as I believe we must have a kind of global perspective in education. But I have said for 13 years now, since I came on the public scene, that we need to have a sense of tradition, history, chronology, things moving down in time. The way kids are being taught today is very ahistorical. The kids know nothing. They're never taught a date. They have no sense whatever. Everything is clustered in the present. They have no sense of the span of time or how large the world is. So I'm afraid that, so I would say television with very little television, please, I think, in education. It's too simple a crutch for teachers to gain student attention.
From Keto Christensen, an email question to you. We know from all of your books that Katharine Hepburn was an important influence on your thinking and behavior. Do you have any words on losing her even now?
Oh, Katharine Hepburn was my first great role model. If I saw a movie of hers on late night TV in Syracuse, New York in 1959, I was 12. I became mad for her, mad for Hepburn.
Why?
I didn't know what it was. I thought, what is it? What is this energy that's coming off of her? I then realized that it was a spirit of these women of the 1920s, 1930s that had been lost in the post-war era of domesticity after the veterans came back and it was the baby boom and so on and so forth. So I became fixated on that period. And we now know, I mean, we didn't know at the time, that Katharine Hepburn's own mother had been an ardent a suffragette, had been head of the Connecticut Suffrage Association. Hepburn herself had marched in these parades as a child, given out balloons, and so on, and that her aunt was even more radical feminist. So I felt the feminist spirit from Katharine Hepburn leaping off that TV screen, these old movies. And I constructed a graph of all Hepburn films ever made I got from the library, and I tried to see them all. And at that time, you couldn't get much information about popular culture. I mean, popular culture was still dismissed, okay? So my passionate interest in the media, okay, was something, in old Hollywood films, was something that you didn't share. I found no one to share it with except gay guys. Only gay guys were interested in all the things. So now Hepburn, she lived a very long time, but I absolutely agree with people who are saying now that she was one of the women of the century. Okay, but she's not a woman who was a mother. She's not a woman who was able to bridge the roles of the professional woman with the woman who was really a more traditional wife and mother. I think it's very, very difficult. That's the tremendous difficulty I think facing women has still not been resolved. How can the child is so needy? Okay, the child is this wants as much attention as possible. I don't agree with the old feminist position that we need endless government daycare centers. I don't think that kind of warehousing of kids is the right model. I came out of an Italian background where children were made enormous attention. They were the center of attention at the same time as they were very disciplined. Okay, so the Mediterranean cultures in general, like Latino culture today, or African American culture, is very child-centered. I think that we began to move away from that in feminism with the infatuation with the career woman through a very long period there.
San Francisco.
Yes, I'd just like to thank Camille for having the courage to be herself through all these years.
Thank you.
And my question would be what will it take for society at large to see through the illusions created by our singular physical gender and into the dual-sex domain of the psyche and personality of the individual?
Well, I believe that there may be a problem here. That is that the realm of art is where one explores the ambiguity of gender, and also the private realm that I've spoken of earlier. I'm not sure to what degree we can export these ideas into the public realm without disordering it. And I worry because as a student of history, I have seen that every time a culture gets supposedly sophisticated, right, and open and tolerant toward alternate lifestyles, toward homosexuality, toward gay marriages, toward sex changes, it's usually a decadent culture that's on the verge of collapse, like ancient Rome. So I'm worried about that. It's a question I'm constantly asking in my book, Sexual Personae, which the subtitle of which is Art in Decadence, okay, from Nefertiti to Emily Dickinson. I love decadence. I admire decadence as a complex historical mode. But I'm worried, okay, when conservatives speak about the the homosexual agenda, they're right. Okay, when they speak about the permeation, suffusion of the media with pro-gay slogans and pro-gay messages, they're right. Okay, and at a time when knowledge of the Bible, which I'm an atheist, I do not believe that the Bible is the Word of God, but the Bible is a magnificent work of art, one of the greatest ever created. It is full of messages and consolation for times of life, okay, of trouble and so on. I worry about a culture where knowledge of the Bible is slipping away even among the religious, whereas we have these trashy shows that are entertaining and glitzy about queer eye for the straight guy and all that kind of thing. I mean, it may seem like this is good, this is progressive. I worry about a massive backlash because Christianity, the rise of Christianity, okay, was that backlash against Greco-Roman paganism, okay? And it's now 2,000 years later, okay? The idea that a progressive culture can sustain itself, okay, in this kind of theatrical way, flamboyant way. After all, I dressed in my transvestite Halloween costumes 1 day per year. I wasn't wearing those costumes every day. It was a kind of Saturnalian thing. So I think that these questions need to be asked much more by people who are on the transgendered side, on the gay activist side. We must study history, right? Nothing ever lasts, and what comes after you may be far worse than what you're trying to reform right now.
How do you feel about the growing anti-Americanism overseas? Is this question?
Oh, this drives me crazy. I mean, oh my God. This is one of my problems with the incursion into Iraq. Right, is this tremendous inflammation of anti-Americanism around the world. I think this is a terrible legacy that has come of this, and for example, last year the foreign press tried to get me repeatedly to write things or to comment to reporters about the prospect of war in Iraq. I refused. Okay, I feel it is wrong for American intellectuals to foment that anti-American feeling that's already abroad. Right? And so I finally did express my feelings to David Talbot in an interview earlier this year for Salon. But I mean, I am highly critical of intellectuals like Susan Sontag, who have made a career of going around the world. You are feted, okay? You are acclaimed. The minute you say anything anti-American abroad, right? People will lay treasure at your feet to do that. So when the Dixie Chicks went over there, okay, I feel that the Dixie Chicks have a right to say whatever they want whenever they want it, okay? But I don't think it was right. I don't think it was right for the Dixie Chicks to say that in England at a performance to get a good, a response from the audience. I want the Dixie Chicks to come back here, okay, and say it everywhere in America.
And you're fine with that?
Oh, they had a right to say it in England too, and they shouldn't be criticized for that. On the other hand, people who want to boycott them also have a right. But I think that it's just there is a deep anti-Americanism in the way humanities are taught on campus. Now, I was one of the first people to raise this issue, by the way, in my essay, in Junk Bonds and Corporate Raiders, which the progressive editor Herbert Golder published in Orion. It's like a long essay. It's in my first book, essay collection, Sex, Art, and American Culture. But I attacked the anti-Americanism, of the theorists who are so enamored of Michel Foucault, etc. I said that it's something extremely wrong. In fact, in the first chapter of Sexual Personae, I also say it is utterly hypocritical for our intellectuals to be sneering at American capitalism while enjoying all the conveniences of American capitalism. Now, my family came to America from the poverty of southern Italy, and we all love America in my family. I have a tremendous love of America, but I think that what's happening now with the Iraq issue unresolved is a terrible kinds of a kind of American boosterism, sort of you're for us or against us, okay, coming out from conservative voices on talk radio. And I mean, people are not unpatriotic for criticizing the Iraq war. It's not, you're not pro-Saddam, okay, and anti-Bush, okay, by criticizing the government policy. So I think that the patriotism issue has become more inflamed than any time since the Vietnamese War.
Well, I want to get to this next caller, but there is another emailer here. It says, do you think that broadcasting of your social messages are fueling Islamism? Islam. Yours.
Broadcasting of mine, fusing. Well, I have written since the early '90s. I have talked about my proposal for reform of education, not just in America but on the global stage, was comparative religion. I believe that the religions, even though I'm an atheist, I believe that the study of world religions, Judeo-Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, that's the key to world understanding. Okay? So, I'm afraid, okay, that my confidence that in Islam was shaken by the absence of significant protest among Muslims in the year following the attack on the World Trade Center. I became very uneasy by that. I could not. I felt that the enormous mass of Muslims are peaceable. They are peaceful, but obviously the way Islam is constructed in this kind of non-hierarchical and non-centralized way, as opposed to the Roman Catholic Church, what you have is an intense and inflamed minority, okay, the Islamicists, right, who intend the destruction of Western civilization, being essentially uncontrolled within that religion. So I have become extremely uneasy by trends in Islam. And again, I'm someone who reads history, so I look at things in terms of 200 or 300 year cycles, like the history of Byzantium or something, hundreds of years of cycles. And so I'm looking down the road, and down the road I see our Iraq incursion, okay, as causing a perpetuation of the kind of Islamic terrorism that attacked the World Trade Center. And I don't think that this was the way to go, to put our tanks into Baghdad, okay. I don't think was the way to diffuse the anti-Americanism in Islamic fundamentalism.
Now let's get to that phone call. San Antonio, thank you for waiting. Go ahead, you're on with Camille Paglia.
Dr. Paglia?
Yes.
I just got to say, I love you. You're one of my favorite columnists. There's Hunter Thompson, Orson Scott Card, Rush Limbaugh, and you.
Thanks.
But ever since you stopped writing for Salon, I have no idea where to read you at now.
Well,
what are you doing? I guess in terms of a regular column.
Well, thank you very much for your remarks. I just found it too exhausting. I need to write books, okay? So I'm currently finishing a book on poetry for Pantheon Books. I've been writing it for 3 years because I feel it's really important for me to go back to books. But I'm writing an occasional column for Interview Magazine, where I'm a contributing editor. But occasionally I do things like this Hillary book review and so on. But I'm afraid that. Thank you very much. But in Rush, may I say about Rush Limbaugh? Yes, I respect Rush Limbaugh, even though his views and mine are quite different, particularly recently about the Iraq War and so on. But I respect him as an independent voice, and I think that the defamation of Rush Limbaugh by liberals and by the Democratic Party is atrocious, because this is a man who created an entire program out of nothing. He's a person, okay, came from the Midwest, who through his own independent mind, this very active imagination of his, managed to create an empire for himself. And he too, he is no stooge for any group. He's an independent man. Yes, now he's relaxing a little more. He's joining golf clubs. That's good. More power to him. He deserves, to rest more. But I think I have gotten so much pleasure. I've gotten more intellectual stimulation from listening to Rush Limbaugh, often when I'm driving my car, than all those theorists in academia.
Arian, people can read you there now.
Yes. Yes.
Another example from the viewer.
Yes.
For the viewer.
Now here is my most recent essay, which is called "Cults and Cosmic Consciousness: Religious Vision in the American 1960s." It's a cover story of this winter issue of Orion. Again,
Orion. Excuse me, I mispronounced
I think. Well, I think it's Herbert Golder is the editor. It's a classics journal, Journal of Classics and Humanities at the Boston University. And in this essay, I speak of I hope that the web link will be available to the viewers so that they can read this very, very long article. It's an overview of the 60s from the point of view of religion, because I feel that this is one aspect of the 60s that is too much neglected. Conservatives attack the 60s with every kind of a cudgel, and I think that they're missing the spiritual impulse that I think motivated so many of the people that I remember from that era. I feel, but it's been a muddle. I mean, the New Age movement that is the result is a terrible muddle. That is New Age movement has tried to revise Judeo-Christianity by removing the judgmentalism, the anti-sex, aspects of it. But I think that people are lost. I think that Western culture is not in great shape. It's not in great shape. Many of the worst things said about it by Islamic fundamentalists are in fact true. People are questing for their sexual identity, questing for personal relationships in perhaps ways that neither of those two things can sustain. I mean, maybe we need to return to the great fundamentals, to the study of nature, the study of great books, I mean, the study of religion. So that's why I feel that even though I don't believe in God, I believe in nature. I feel that the world religions are great, complex symbol systems, far more interesting and illuminating and sustaining than anything produced by European post-structuralism or postmodernism. And that whenever I talk about religion to students, no matter what background they come from, they're craving it, they're thirsty. The kids today are thirsty, they're wandering this utterly banal media environment with these trashy shows. We're not in the period of great Hollywood anymore. We're not in the period of great stars anymore. Even Madonna is on the decline. Okay, there hasn't been a major star performance since Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct in 1992. Okay, so we're wandering this desert wasteland of media. People are just, and we look like, we look like hedonistic, materialistic, empty-headed imperialists to people abroad. I can understand the anti-Americanism that's happening. We've just got to pull ourselves out of this. You
can see that website on your screen right now that Camille Paglia was talking about, and you can go to it at www.bu.edu/Orion. Next call for her is San Diego.
Yes, hi. I hate to burst the love fest here, and while I respect you as the most rational of sort of conservative point of views I've heard on C-SPAN, it's just filled with so many falsehoods. This is your interpretation. I'm an anthropological archaeologist, so of course I learn history. I don't know what you're talking about at universities. That's all we learn is history. And I teach fundamentals, I teach basic writing, and what I have are a bunch of conservative kids, and you're right, they don't know history, but they have some longing for a traditional past that their conservative Republican parents have taught them that never existed. I mean, first of all, back to your gender roles. This is so, I'm glad your ancestors were good with their hands. What does that say about men? That's absurd. Second of all, as an anthropologist, if you look around the world, gender roles are specific, and you should know this as a historian, that our gender roles are specific to a post-industrial revolution America. They are not shared. If you go to the Aceh in the Philippines, the women are using bows and arrows. If you go to the markets in Africa, the Azande women are the toughest-minded women you'll ever see. Our gender roles are specific to our time and our place. This ridiculous thing about gender roles, women are, it is so historically and culturally bound, and Americans, part of why people hate us is we think our way is the only way, because we don't have any sense of ourselves and that it was different, and that before the Industrial Revolution, gender roles were different, and it totally changes over time. And the other thing is this idea of progress. There is no such thing. That is why Darwin did not publish his book. What he was afraid of wasn't that we evolved from apes. What he was afraid of is the implication that there is no such thing as progress. Things just change. That's what I learned as an archaeologist. What is a constant in archaeology is not the ideology, but elites manipulating ideology in order to control people. And what I'm worried about is this idea of fundamentals. What fundamental? I keep hearing about traditional values. Is that lynching black people? That's a traditional American value. Is that what we want?
San Diego, thank you.
Oh, well, I'm not sure why she was disagreeing with me, because apparently everything she said up to the lynching part, I agreed with absolutely everything. I think I've made it absolutely clear that I've talked about the way gender roles have changed, how radically from, for example, the 1920s and 30s, the Katharine Hepburn and Amelia Earhart era was quite different than the social role being imposed on me, the gender role, in the 1950s. Oh, my gosh. Yes, these things are very much in flux. Nevertheless, in my work, I do believe that there is some basis in biology for gender roles. And my book, Sexual Personae, begins with the Venus of Willendorf, which is a cult object found in an Austrian site that dates perhaps from 25,000 years BC. And I talk about what this obese object, which is blind with hardly like sort of flipper arms and no feet, what that means about the image of woman, understanding of woman that was projected at a time of survivalist life, where people were desperate in times of famine, for food and so on. And then in Sexual Personae, I go on to the bust of Nefertiti and look at the vision of woman that was transformed in Egyptian aristocratic society, where all of a sudden now we don't have the large breasts of the Venus of Willendorf that are like milk sacks, but are the small, elegant breasts of these of the upper class women. So that is what I call the birth of the Western eye, where there's a migration from the solar plexus to the eye and to this projection. That's what Western culture has been brilliant at. The projection of ambition and illusion, and yes, the delusion of progress. Western culture has been deluded with the idea of progress from the start, whereas Hinduism does not believe in that. It believes in the great wheel of reincarnation, things moving. So, I mean, actually, there's hardly anything I disagree with in that caller.
Alexandria, Virginia.
Hi, Professor Paglia, I've enjoyed hearing your ideas for many years. I especially enjoyed being on C-SPAN, a speech you gave to the Yale Political Union several years ago, where you talked about the changes in name of storms from just female names to including both male and female names. I thought that was hilarious. But more importantly, you've identified yourself as a libertarian, but then you also have said that you voted for the Clintons twice, and you've identified yourself as a member of the Democratic Party. And I wonder, with so many libertarians or people that believe that people should make their own choices unhindered by government, how those people have mainly gravitated towards the Republican Party, although obviously there's a split with the religious right. Why you identify yourself with the Democratic Party?
Thank you so much for that wonderful question, because I do not belong to the libertarian society, and many libertarians are indeed rather conservative. It's because I believe in this sharp demarcation of the public versus private realm, but I believe that there should be a safety net for the poor and the weak. I believe there are legitimate areas for government activity. I think that in the area of public clinics, of upkeep of roads and so on, I do believe, though, in the shrinking of government. I believe that we have a sprawling government bureaucracy that survives administrations. It doesn't matter whether it's a Republican or Democrat in the White House. We have this endless number of laws, and more laws. I think there has to be a kind of Gordian knot, cutting way down in terms of regulations of intrusion into people's lives. On the other hand, I am well aware from the Industrial Revolution on of the tendency of capitalism, which I believe in, because I believe that capitalism has produced the modern independent woman, the woman who is no longer dependent on father or husband, okay, for her sustenance. I do believe that capitalism is Darwinian, and that government regulation, government oversight is necessary. One of my favorite poems that works so well in class, and I've talked about it in Sexual Personae, is William Blake's Chimney Sweep poem, where you see the atrocity of child labor and the short lives of these poor children that were made to go up chimneys and to inhale that carcinogenic dust and so on. It's only government action, which was debated for decades. And to what degree did government have the right to come in to regulate a private industrial workplace? It was a huge argument that went on for like 40, 50 years in England. So I do feel that that there's this kind of dynamic going on in modern industrial culture, and that is we have. I believe in entrepreneurship. I believe that the vitality of business and so on. But what we have today, with kind of sprawling, global kind of corporate entities, and this there's a kind of it's definitely a fossilization happening in the very mechanism that was invented in the Industrial Revolution in England that has produced so much wealth and has produced our high standard of living. So I think that again, there is a role for government, a great role for government, but I do not believe in the big government solution or the endless, the micromanaging of social policy policy, okay, which is endorsed by so many members of the Democratic Party.
Our emailer, Patricia Roy, wants to know what you think of William F. Buckley Jr.
William Buckley Jr. Well, I respect him as a great mind originally, okay. But I think that once he was such a controversialist. He was such an opposer to current orthodoxies, beginning in his college career at Yale and so on. So I really respect him. But I feel that by the time the '90s came around, when I came on the scene, okay, that I wish that he had been more active in the reform of campus politics. I feel that he would make kind of lordly allusions to the matter and kind of dismissive manner on his show. But I became rather vexed over the period of the '90s. I felt that if he had used his weight to really, wade into the issues, that we wouldn't have this kind of lost generation which we have today. I mean, in the humanities, this situation is a disaster on college campuses. Some of our most brilliant and promising young people who did not go into the humanities were driven out of the graduate schools over the last 15 years. And so there's a period now where we're trying to recuperate. And so the greatest activity that's been done of reform has been done by David Horowitz on his site, frontpagemagazine.com. I mean, David Horowitz has done more in the last 3 years, okay, to prod along campus reform than William F. Buckley did throughout that period of the '90s, when he should have been full cudgels on it.
Philadelphia, Camille Paglia's home city.
Hi, Dr. Paglia. It's a thrill and an honor to speak to you.
Thank you.
A few years back, during the O.J. Simpson murder trial, you had made a comment about the 911 tape, the recording that Nicole Simpson had made. And your comment, I hope you remember, was that what you were listening to and what you were hearing was a woman playing a game. That's how you termed it. Mm-hmm. And I found that so interesting because, up until that time, I hadn't really considered her role, if you will, in her own demise, or however minor it might be. And I was wondering if you could either expand on that specifically or maybe just about women in abusive relationships in general.
Well, one doesn't want to blame the victim in any situation. When an atrocity is committed, I believe in the death penalty, by the way, I might point out. I believe that anyone who commits an atrocious murder or particularly torture, murders of children, these people should be executed, okay, so in my opinion. So I'm not excusing the assailant, whoever it was in this case, although so many of us suspected was O.J. himself. I have said that was an example, okay, of when the police are starting to be drawn in to private relationships, whether through restraining orders, okay, or whatever, where you're making 911 calls. What you have then is a combat that starts, a competition between the man and the police. Okay, I think that women actually end up endangering themselves further by this because the man they end up getting killed sometimes because the man wants to defeat the police. I'll show you, I can get to her, that kind of thing. So I think that what we need much more of is a sense of psychology. Oddly enough, psychology, despite all of our talk shows, they're always talking about personal relationships and so on, real psychological analysis seems to me to be receding over the last 10 years. We need, I think, much more talking about relationships. What do people look for in sex? I think there's a lot of symbolism in sex. So what are people seeking for? When you have an unstable relationship, if a relationship has been abusive, and it was with Nicole Simpson, of course she was young when they started going together, the young Nicole, but his abusiveness to her, his controlling of her, him pushing her around physically was an item already in that relationship. My attitude is, if someone does something to you now, it's going to continue. Don't think you're ever going to cure that. There is a process of psychological need and control in certain men that I have analyzed as has something to do with the mother complex. Okay, it's some shadowy game that the man is playing with the poor wife or lover as proxy for his problems with a feeling over controlled or his identity obliterated by an older generation. I think that there's a lot of these questions of psychology operating in gay identity too. But you heaven forbid, anyone should mention, anyone can know there is such a thought police right now on this question. Okay, for 20 years you cannot ask any questions, okay, about the psychological development of either gay or actually heterosexual identity. That's off the table right now. The only problems for anyone are an oppressive public system that needs to be revised. But many of these inner ambiguities in people, inner drives, are illuminated by art art is the best way to actually discover who you are, in my view. Okay, it is not through passing more regulations, having the police come in and create order in a relationship that is unstable.
Mesa, Arizona.
Yes, my question is about gun rights. I loved what Ms. Paglia wrote about in Salon a couple of years ago, that the right to bear arms is a protection against the tyranny of government, because governments always tend to exploit and abuse people, and the only thing that's protecting us is the protection of individual gun rights. And I have a second question as well. And I formulated this as I was listening, waiting online, and that was, you said that since Sharon Stone, there's been no real big breakout star. May I suggest that in the recent movie Swimming Pool, Ludivine Sagnier is somebody to take a look at. I don't know if you've seen that movie.
I haven't had a chance. I sure will, because she's French, of course, and naturally non-American. That shows that perhaps European culture is revitalizing itself. Yes, yes, I do. I don't own guns. I'm not interested in guns, but all my uncles hunt. They have a right to have guns, no matter how liberals want to dice and slice it. I believe that that it is very clearly stated in our Bill of Rights that there is a right to bear arms. Now, that does not mean, of course, that people should be having assault weapons, okay, and having stockpiles of weapons in an urban environment. I'm not sure exactly how to approach this, except to restabilize the social structure of the inner cities. I think we can't be intruding into the rights of law-abiding gun owners outside the urban centers merely because of pathologies that have nothing whatever to do with guns, actually.
There's an emailer here who says, have you noticed that all of your callers are male? I think he's wrong. I think there were 2 females so far, but he says, how much of your following is male as opposed to female?
I haven't noticed a split. It's usually men who like to call. I mean, the men like to call. There's like this, they like to get in contact. But I've gotten a lot of letters over the years from women who, particularly the ones, as I just mentioned, that were driven out of graduate school, wanted to go into the humanities, and just could not swallow this diet of totally useless and jargon-choked post-structuralism that they were forced to study instead of real literature and art. But I think that when I came on the scene in 1990, okay, I was speaking for men in a way that hadn't been done. I mean, Warren Farrell, in his book *The Myth of Male Power*, a former member of NOW actually, was writing about these issues, but very few other people. Now, Christine Hoff Sommers was out in the late 1980s when I was still unpublished, couldn't get my work published. She was out there boldly challenging feminist rhetoric in so many areas, and she deserves a lot of credit for having initiated so much of the reform that has happened. I think very well within feminism. But no one was saying a good word about men, okay, at all, and I thought it was ridiculous. The point I was always making was that the world that we women enjoy now, that allows us to be free and independent careerists, right, was created by men. It's this huge invisible structure, and so many of the upper middle class professionals don't even notice the kind of physical labor that goes into the production of their space. Okay, that people who are laying the roof, tar, doing all the dirty work, who are the plumbers and the people who are doing the construction of our physical environment. So coming out of an immigrant family that was originally working class, my family came to work in the Endicott Johnson shoe factories in upstate New York. I tend to have a more positive view of industry. Okay, and also, by the way, but this actually addresses something from a prior caller asked. I have a view of enlightened capitalism too, because the Johnson family, that were the owners of the Endicott Johnson shoe factory, believed in taking care of the workers. There was free medical care. There was help with housing, and there was freight cars full of citrus fruit sent up from their Florida abode every winter and so on. I thought there was a kind of caring, personal relationship that the Johnson family had with their immigrant, Italian-speaking, for the most part, workers. I thought it was a kind of model of what an enlightened businessman should be behaving like, I think.
Oakland, California.
Thrilled to find you here on a Sunday morning, Camille. When I first heard you and when I started reading your books, just stirred my blood, the blood flowing between my ears here. And
thank you. All right, thank you.
Born in America and being a native English speaker, I've learned to appreciate a little Italian through music study and film, and I'm wondering if you've had any occasion to use it in your research or just casually, and have your works been translated into Italian, and how were they received, and do you have any favorite Italian movies?
Oh my gosh, there's so many questions there. Okay, favorite Italian movies, I don't know about current Italian movies. My favorite ones are like La Dolce Vita, 8½, and Monica Vitti in L'Avventura. Movies like the great classics of art film. But yes, my works have been translated into Italian. I'm treated well. I'm a kind of, I guess, icon in certain areas. I've written quite a bit for Corriere della Sera. When I came on the scene, it was at the same time as Madonna was becoming this world phenomenon, and we were often linked together because I was kind of an explainer, explicator of Madonna at the time. Her background as an Italian American was very similar to mine. I certainly use Italian in terms of opera. I mean, Puccini is a huge influence on me. I was listening to Puccini operas throughout the writing of my Emily Dickinson chapter, actually, in Sexual Personae. There's music. I had different music for different chapters. Actually, for the entire book, I'm very influenced by music. My two sides of the family spoke different dialects in my childhood. My mother's family comes from a small town called Chicano in Lazio, about 20 miles north of Monte Cassino, and they speak Cecanese. It's completely different than the Napolitan dialect spoken by my Paglia side grandmother, who came from the small towns inland, Benevento, Caserta, and so on. So in my childhood, so much is body language. Okay, in childhood, I think that's one reason why I have such an instinctive understanding of dancers, and why I have such a rapport with dancers and dance teachers and the whole dance school at my own school. There's a way that Italians live in their body, I think, that's almost it's beneath the level of language.
Marissa in Silver Spring wants to know what you think of The Sopranos.
I loathe The Sopranos. I have been on the warpath. Warpath. I joined the National Italian American Foundation in protest against The Sopranos. I'm active also now with the Order of the Sons of Italy, that actually had its headquarters in Endicott, right next to my own grandmother's house there. I love the Godfather films. I thought they were masterpieces. I revered Mario Puzo. I interviewed him actually for the New York Times, so on. But The Sopranos, I love. And the reason being, it has to do, I think, not only for the way it portrays Italian Americans as buffoons, right? But the way it portrays working class life. I think The Sopranos is wildly out of date. It actually has to do with a 1960s style, okay, of North Jersey, not late 1980s or like 1990s. And I teach in Philadelphia now, and there is a style, okay, that working class people have, a style of expression, right, that I feel is caricatured on that show, okay. I feel that show is a favorite of upper middle class viewers, right, who almost think they're getting an anthropological perspective to something that doesn't exist anymore, and in fact is being, as I said, it's a cartoon. It's a cartoon vision. I've tried to watch. I haven't gotten through a whole program. Okay, I try to watch it. Okay, and I become furious, absolutely furious. But I know many people who are great fans of the show. So I don't want to, my take on it shouldn't influence anyone else in this or in anything.
Chicago.
Thank you. Sexual Personae, which I read for the first time when I was in high school. I'm 24 years old now, and then I reread as I was studying in Florence, Italy, sitting under the Great Duomo. Was the central formative text, I think, of my intellectual development, and I'm happy to hear that you're focusing again on writing books.
Thank you.
I think that much more than columns, the book is really the right genre for your ideas, which have always been on a grand scale.
Thank you.
Along with Sexual Personae, your essay, Junk Bonds and Corporate Raiders, was essential in my decision not to attend graduate school in the humanities, but rather to study law, which is a profession in which I think honorable men and women can still adjust the intellect to real questions of society, as thinkers of the Italian Renaissance and Montaigne and people like that did in the past. My question is, given the current situation in academia, especially in the humanities, where should intelligent young people today direct their energy? Thank you.
I think actually that the theory boom, thank God, is waning. Okay? I feel that the situation is much better than it was in 1991 when Junk Bonds and Corporate Raiders was published. And that, by the way, that is a long piece.
And which one is it in?
It's in Sex, Art, and American Culture. It is a very long piece that dissects two books that Ryan sent me to review about, they were by two gay academics, Foucault admirers of classical antiquity. And I was shocked when I actually read them, when I saw the trashing of all the generations generations of great scholars who had come before and who had like done this backbreaking work to put together all these great editions and gathered all this archaeological information, and now was being thrown out the window by these trendy careerists going from conference to conference. So when I came on the scene in the early 1990s, Lacan, Derrida, and Foucault were like gods. Derrida was slightly starting to fade because he had been revealed as a Nazi sympathizer. Oh, I love that. But Lacan was deeply entrenched in feminism, and Foucault was like a god. Right? So I went after them, and I show in that piece, which I stand behind today, I think it's just as true today, of all the insufficiencies in the thinking of, particularly of Foucault. But I think that everybody knows now, apparently even the New York Times was reporting recently that there was a whole glum conference of a confab of theorists who got together and who said, where now, whither now, theory is over, where are we going to go now? Well, yeah, you trashed academia, you trashed it, okay? Great art and literature, okay, was diminished, okay? Not only for undergraduates who went through, but in the eyes of the nation, okay? And now you have this like wasteland, okay? I'm speaking of the humanities, again, only. Didn't happen in the sciences, okay? And not in history proper, too much, except in the most PC places. So now I think is actually a good moment, perhaps, for graduate students to start rethinking about the humanities. And I mean, my mantra is always hate dogma. I hate dogma. Do not accept dogma from anyone, including me. Okay, I'm speaking for myself. I'm simply a free thinker. Okay, that's what I'm saying. Do not follow the dogma of any institution, any body of theory. Okay, you must respond yourself to great literature and art. And I think we can. I think the thing will be reconstructed. But Harold Bloom said on this very program, he doesn't think it's going to happen in his lifetime, and it may not happen in my lifetime. But I'm convinced the humanities will rebound. Everything always rebounds in the long run. I think. But the colleges are in a period now of retrenchment. An obscene period, of course, of extravagant, tuition charges by the major universities. I mean, an enormous scam that the major media has ignored, and a scandal bankrupting middle-class families. Right? So there's going to be a period of retrenchment. It's being reported now, all kinds of cutbacks at Stanford, at Duke, at Bryn Mawr, and so on. So I think after we go through this period, okay, what I'm worried about is that the humanities have been marginalized. Okay? The humanities have shown themselves worthless. Okay? When I entered graduate school in 1968, poetry and literature and art were at the high point of prestige. What did the humanities departments do in America, okay, to trash that? And no one cares what goes on campus, okay? No one believes that literature and art are of any interest, thanks to the mishandling of these issues, okay, on campus. So anyway, I would encourage young people who are watching, this is a good moment, okay, to enter into put your impress, your interpretation on the whole cultural tradition. I think there is a great future in teaching, including, if only we could liberate the public schools. Okay. If all these unemployed PhDs and MAs in the humanities, we can't employ them in the public schools. Okay. Why? Because of this terrible parasitic teacher union thing, and you've got to have an education degree. Okay, worthless education degree. Okay. Put the PhDs to work in the classroom, for heaven's sakes. Our inner cities, our schools are a mess. It's a scandal. You said next year will be 20 years at 20 years at the University of the Arts. This title is actually a fairly recent one. It was a merger of the Philadelphia College of Art with the Philadelphia College of Performing Arts in the late 80s. And both of those institutions go all the way back to the 19th century in terms of their forerunners. The art school was associated with the Philadelphia Museum, okay, and there was a conservatory founded by musicians and composers from Leipzig. Okay, there was the Philadelphia Musical Academy. So this is the incarnation now that's expanded into all kinds of areas, that it's jazz, dance, animation, all kinds of things.
Before that at Bennington?
I was at Bennington for my first job for 8 years in the 1970s, and I got into one problem after another. I was in a state of delusion still. I didn't take drugs in the 60s. I don't take drugs. I'm against drugs. I believe in sophisticated use of alcohol with meals. This is what I believe. But I was in equally a state of delusion. I don't know what dementia we 60s people were in. Okay, so I did one stupid thing after another at Bennington. I had a wonderful experience there. Brilliant students, some of whom I still have, like Heidi John Schmidt, who was a writer and novelist. Her novel is coming out, The Bride of Catastrophe, from Picador in a few months. I had a student, Kristen Lippincott, who is now the director of the Greenwich Observatory Museum in London, and so on. So I had such creative students at Bennington. It was a wonderful time, but everyone was mad. It was a state of madness after the 60s.
One of your detractors said you left there after a fist fight.
Yeah. Oh no, I said it.
True?
Yeah. Well, it's a long story. Okay, it's a very long story. But yes, the culminating incident. But that was only one. There had been like every couple of years was some big thing. Okay, like where I kicked the student in the rear end, and the feminist students gave me the award of the Golden Boot, for it. I mean, there was one drama after another. Finally, there was a fist fight at a dance. Now, I was too young. What was I doing at the dance? Okay, I mean, I shouldn't be there. But at Bennington, there were no ranks, and it's everything's, you're supposed to be called by your first name, and everything was very so. Yeah, I mean, so there was a culminating drama. Okay, at the end. But I was always a very physical person. I've learned a lot about life. Okay. One of the big things I learned at Bennington, I feel I grew up at Bennington. I really do. I mean, that first job. And one of the big lessons I learned, okay, is that institutions change slowly, and that if you want to effect change, and this is true of government too, okay, it must be incremental change. That we of the 60s were too impatient, and that we had this narcissistic, megalomaniacal idea that change would happen overnight, and that we were the ones to do it. And this kind of sense of the elect, that we had. And some of the most brilliant minds that I knew, they all screwed up. They all screwed up through drugs or through misjudgments, or they died of AIDS or whatever. Okay, so I feel that some of the greatest points of view of the 60s never found the book. They never got as far as leaving the book, leaving something for posterity, which I think is very important. You cannot just, the 60s thing is experience, be experience. No, you can't just be an experience, which is what you're taught actually in Buddhism or even Hinduism. Okay, in the Western tradition, okay, there is this impulse, this propulsion to create something that will last. Nothing's going to last. Nothing will last. But this impulse to create the thing that we hope will last has, I think, produced our kind of pyramiding achievements. That is one of the great glories of the West.
Oakland, California. You're next with Camille Paglia. Go ahead, Oakland.
Oh, yes, I have a question. Love your work.
Thank you.
I'm interested in your take on an exclusively male organization like the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club and a leader like Sonny Barnes.
Ooh, oh, wow.
You're getting everything today, aren't you?
Well, the Hells Angels were they were like tremendous culture icons to us in the 1960s, perhaps excessively. Of course, that whole motorcycle ethos was launched for us by Marlon Brando's appearance in the Wild One, which had its roots and some sort of early Hells Angels incident that happened in a town in 1948 or something in Northern California, if I remember correctly. But the image of Brando with his motorcycle and his leather jacket was on posters on our walls, at that time. Well, I mean, the Hells Angels thing is like, it's so American, sort of be free. They're like Vikings, like Vikings in the open air. They don't. Now, of course, the disastrous error made by the Rolling Stones and having them be security guards for the rock concert at Altamont. It's chronicled, of course, in Gimme Shelter. Anyone who hasn't seen that movie must. I mean, I don't think that the Hells Angels are a model, okay, for social development, because they're so isolationist and and anarchic. They're kind of a tribal unit. And today, of course, it's not the same. Today's Hells Angels is a far more genteel organization than it once was. But they will live forever in terms of American cultural models, even for the world at large. I think that the motorcycle used to be for Europeans quite a proper and kind of an official bike used by military officers and so on. But it was Americans through the Hells Angels who turned the motorbike into the hog, into a kind of a modern horse that moving over the open plains.
There are people who might find this picture of you or this graphic of you, they might not appreciate it, or they may not like it, and so I'm going to tell them that ahead of time in case they don't want to see it. But this comes from one of your books. Okay. You mentioned Marlon Brando. We're talking about motorcycles. Oh. This was the picture of you, a caricature of you rather, that was not allowed to be put in the San Francisco Examiner. How did this come about? How did this caricature come about?
Zach Trunholm did this. I guess they were doing a profile of me or something in the San Francisco Examiner, and he did this. And I guess there are, I hesitate to say, sexual devices for handlebars. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, there it is. Okay, and they found that it was not suitable for a family newspaper. Okay, but it's a wonderful caricature, and I told him I would like to put it in a future book of mine, and there it is.
Raleigh, North Carolina.
Hello, Dr. Paglia. It seems that one of the most needed things in early education, pre-collegiate education, is greater emphasis on developmental psychology. It seems that the students are not being taught Bloom's taxonomy and Maslow and things like that help them order their lives and their education. Could you comment on that? And comment well, in that line, it seems that, well, maybe we don't need so much history early on, that history is really an advanced kind of thing to study.
Well, I'm not sure. Can you tell me, you're saying that developmental psychology is being neglected in what area, in your experience, where?
In grade school.
In grade school. You mean on the part of the teachers, you mean?
Students aren't taught it, and parents haven't been taught it, so they're not able to take control of education as well as they should.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I can see a couple of things. I mean, I think that there are a lot of problems in American life in terms of, I think that children are arriving at school with discipline problems that are not that the school should not have to deal with. Okay? I think that the schools are, of my parents' day, were much firmer in preserving an orderly environment so that the working class kids could learn. And so I think also that parents are not taking responsibility for what they can impart to the child before the child ever reaches even preschool. And that the basis of my education really is my parents reading to me. We didn't have any money, for heaven's sakes. My father was still in college when I was born. My parents simply read to me, and I think that is absolutely crucial, particularly in this modern media age. Now, he asked what was the second question? I'm sorry.
I missed it. Sorry.
Wait, the second one was. Oh no, there was something that I wanted to get to actually first. Oh dear.
It happens every once in a while.
Oh dear.
Maybe if we think of it, we'll come back to it.
All right. Hopefully, we'll come back to it. I'm so sorry.
Novato, California.
Yes, hello. I admire your books, and my husband is a fan of yours, and he's the one that recommended I read your book. He's loved them.
Thank you.
I wanted to question you about the feeling of the mass cultural idol, as it were, and you mentioned Madonna, then Sharon Stone, and I want to put forth a new candidate for the younger generation, Jennifer Lopez. She has her own industry, money. She's a sexual icon for the younger generation. She's in relationships with men that when they don't suit her, she doesn't like them, she's gone. And also, the movies that she did were very powerful for women. For instance, Selena, and the movie Enough, where she gets martial training and defends herself, as you have said on the program earlier, is what women need to do. So I wondered what your thoughts were on Jennifer Lopez.
Well, I have been following her career since Selena. I thought Selena was what a piece of work that is, a piece of acting. I'm a little disappointed that the kind of the look that she projects now is a little bit bleached out. I mean, I like that very, very sort of sun-ripened Latin look that she had in Selena. Her emotional range in that film, as well as her dance moves, are just simply sensational. I loved her early albums. I think that part of the problem now is that she's becoming a diva, and we do need divas. I mean, as Cher is approaching the end of her long run and so on. It's really quite hilarious. Yes, the way that Jennifer Lopez seems to be in total control of men and is now a spokesperson for so many products. I think she may be hitting a rough patch, though, right now. It's the same one that maybe Madonna hit. Her current movie is getting slammed. The new movie with Ben Affleck, Geely or whatever it is I'm afraid getting some of the worst reviews of probably of the year. Well, oh no, we have to remember Madonna's Swept Away was equally a terrible disaster. But I think that Jennifer Lopez, yes, she is a New York. She's being from the Bronx, she definitely projects that street smart feminism that I was talking about in the early '90s and in Vamps and Tramps. So thank you for that question.
Here's a caricature of Camille Paglia as Diva in the Harvard Gay and Lesbian Review of 1994 from one of your books. Question from Lee Martinez, email question. What do you think of President Bush's re-election chances?
Well, as a Democrat, I think, disappointingly, I think Bush's chances are very good, because I don't think that the Democrats are going to be able to show that they can be relied on for security and military issues. And this is something that I have for 10 years been talking about. Since the beginning of the 90s, I have criticized the domestic preoccupation obsession of the Democratic Party, and particularly of the women politicians who were so involved in caretaking issues that when, in fact, to be commander-in-chief, and I am so committed to the idea of getting a woman into the White House, to be commander-in-chief, you have to command the armed forces. And so the one thing we should be preparing our ambitious young women for from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s is military history, and instead that was completely neglected. Okay, in this anti-war, anti-military, anti-American bias of the elite universities. So right now, therefore, there's this vacuum in the Democratic Party. We have Kerry, who does have his experience in the Vietnamese War, but then he became a protester against the war after that. I mean, are there any one of these people that even I, as a Democrat, have to say that I would give the security of the nation over into? So despite all of my criticisms, and I have many of the Republican administration, okay, for including the what I feel are intrusions into civil liberties by John Ashcroft, I still feel that that the voters are going to say, okay, who are you going to feel safer with in the White House in this the age of terrorism? Okay, President Bush or one of the 12 dwarves.
What is the best thing that George Bush has done as president, in your opinion?
President Bush has restored dignity to the White House, okay, which was treated like Animal House, like a frat house, by the president that I helped to elect, by Bill Clinton. All those young twerps, okay, going in there and behaving. I mean, the picture on the front of the National Enquirer of the Clintons' friends bouncing with their feet on the Lincoln bed in the Lincoln bedroom, okay, a disgrace, okay. Those people did not take seriously, okay, what the august nature of the mission of the presidency, and so I think that's one thing. And I love the one thing I love is the way that President Bush doesn't care about socialites, doesn't care about the media bigwigs, doesn't care about Hollywood celebrities. The Clintons are always schmoozing with the Hollywood celebrities, okay, in a way that's servile. And the President of the United States and the First Lady should not have been so servile to the Hollywood elite. And I love Hollywood. I'm a great admirer of Hollywood, but I think they should know their place, okay, in the great scheme of things.
New York City.
Hi, Dr. Paglia. It's an honor to speak with you.
Hi.
Thank you for your masterworks. I miss your salon columns. I wish you'd bring them back. If you could comment on two things. One, when your follow-up to Sexual Personae will be out, and the Kobe Bryant case.
Ooh, all right. Well, the second volume of Sexual Personae, which is popular culture, has been sitting in a box since 1981, when both volumes were done for the first time. Okay, it took forever to get the first volume into print, and now, clearly, if both volumes had come out in 1990, Yale Press couldn't have done that. You need a wheelbarrow. Okay, this is already a 700-page book, the volume one. Now, so much else has happened that I need to, I'm rethinking the volume two, because I no longer am quite the evangelist of popular culture that I was in 1981 or even 1990 because of the precipitous decline in quality of popular culture. So I now realize that my volume two, when it comes out, will have a very elegiac cast to it, and it's not what I would hope. And then the second, what was
Kobe Bryant.
Oh, the Kobe Bryant. Well, I'm not sure of obviously the facts of the case. No one does know, all right? But it has been interesting to see that from the very start, the automatic belief in Kobe Bryant's view of it rather than this girl's view of it in the media, and I thought what a reversal it was since the time of 1989, 1990, when we had all those those date rape cover stories and People, and Larry King was having date rape victims on the show and so on and so on. I thought that's it's very interesting, but whether or not this girl has mental problems, okay, is irrelevant to whether or not an assault occurred in that room, and we must wait the facts of the case. But I will say this, that anyone who has stranger sex, whether they're straight like Kobe Bryant, or they're gay men or whatever, anytime you pick up a stranger, okay, you are importing right out next to your body, okay, every kind of psychodrama in that person's head, and you don't know what they are. You don't know if they're a knife murderer or a deranged person. So Kobe Bryant has made a serious misjudgment. That's pretty obvious, no matter what here, because I believe that his commercial endorsements, at least, are certainly in serious jeopardy, if not already dead as a doornail.
Ferdinand Geis of Cleveland wants to know how you feel about Ayn Rand's writing.
People have often asked me about Ayn Rand. People notice a similarity.
Mm-hmm.
I never actually read her in college. When her great period was actually the 1950s. The people in the 1950s who were just in beat writing and who were kind of bohemian were very into Ayn Rand. So I heard her name, and then when I came on the scene in the 90s, all of a sudden she was back again, and people began asking me. And I think that so then I actually looked at her work, and I went, oh my God, there are passages in Ayn Rand that sound like my writing, and they sound like Sexual Personae. I went, this is so interesting. And I think the thing is that her influences were similar to mine. That is, she was very interested in the romantic writers. She was, she liked, I think she absorbed Nietzsche in many ways. But the difference between me and Ayn Rand, she believes in the strong individual. But I believe in government. I don't just believe in the individualist going out and being able to be all things to the world. I mean, I do believe that the government has a role to protect the poor. I'm not just Darwinian saying, oh, the poor and the weak have just to fall aside. And another thing is that Ayn Rand, like Simone de Beauvoir, is a rationalist. Okay. And I don't just believe in the power of the rational mind. I believe in the power of dreaming, of imagination, of art. I believe in the irrational. And there's this kind of a bias that Ayn Rand and Simone de Beauvoir had against religion. I take religion very seriously. I think it is the most fully developed of all the comprehensive views of the universe that the human beings have yet produced. So I don't have that dismissive quality. Simone de Beauvoir and Ayn Rand were very disdainful of people who were religious and felt that they were like weaklings. Okay, they should just get over it. Okay, all those children's stories, those fairy tales. I think that's quite wrong, and I think that is a limited view in its own way.
We're going to take 2 more calls and then take a short break. Okay. Next is Mill Valley, California.
Yes, I'm a big fan of yours for at least 10 years, and
thank you.
I own the DVD Basic Instinct with your commentary on it, which I think is brilliant.
Thank you.
I consider myself a connoisseur of DVD commentaries.
Thank you.
By the way, the best way to watch DVD commentaries is with the subtitles on, much more complex. But I have a question. Do you have any plans to do more? Also, in Basic Instinct, I've watched Sharon Stone many times. I think her performance actually harks back to Kim Novak in Bell Book and Candle. I'd like to comment on that as well.
You mentioned one of my favorite films. I adored Kim Novak in Bell Book and Candle. Okay, that whole mystery. She's like a witch in the occult and so on. Oh, that kind of. There's a little of that quality that Kim Novak also has in Vertigo, which I think even Hitchcock, the director, didn't appreciate. Yes, I think actually Sharon Stone is picking up all the great blondes. You know, Sharon Stone's performance. I mean, she'd been on the scene for like 18 years or something before she made Basic Instinct, and she worked her way up to that role. And you can feel in it actually Dietrich. You know, you can feel in it Lana Turner, definitely Kim Novak, and I think a little Madonna. Sharon Stone does Madonna better than Madonna has ever been able to do herself on the screen. In terms of doing other, yes, I would love to do other documentary, other commentaries on DVDs of classic films like that. And I also have done cameos. I've done cameos satirizing myself in various films, like It's Pat. As a cameo. Hal Hartley's Henry Fool. Cheryl Dunier's film A Watermelon Woman. I just sort of pop up and satirize myself in them. I enjoy very much doing TV work. I've done programs in in England as well. I love the whole production quality. So as a professor, as an analyst of media, I've been very fortunate in the last 13 years to be able to get behind the scenes of media and see actually how things work behind the stage, behind the screen.
Deerfield, Illinois.
Yes, hi. I do enjoy your work, Professor Paglia.
Thank you.
I just want to, I have 2 comments. One was you made an earlier comment about Lacan, Derrida, and Foucault that you misspoke. Derrida is actually Jewish. It was Paul Deman, who was the Nazi sympathizer.
There were two cases.
Well, not,
yeah,
but
Derrida
is an Algerian. He's from Algiers, and he's Jewish, born Jewish, and never was a Nazi sympathizer. The second thing, it was Paul Deman. The second thing, I do take issue with some of your comments about theory. I've been in graduate school, and I'm now a teacher. One of the reasons that theory gained strength in the academy, I believe, was a concern for the Enlightenment. And people do not realize that these theorists are really commentators. They're just trying to describe, say, a postmodern world, a postmodern condition. But many of the people influenced by post-structuralism take the canon, Kant, Rousseau, Hobbes, very seriously. and I wonder what you thought about that.
Wait, let me say, I think you're quite right that earlier actually that's a quotation about Paul de Man from my own Junk Bonds and Corporators. Paul de Man is a Nazi sympathizer. I apologize. But there was a scandal over Derrida, I'm not remembering it too clearly now, that began around 1988 and 1989, okay, in addition to Paul de Man. And there was something, it was involving Nazi something, and I'm sorry, I'm not pulling it up right now off. It's like 15 years now since that happened. But Derrida's star was already sinking when I came on the scene in 1991 because of this. It was a scandal in its own right. But I apologize for misspeaking earlier. Now, in regard to the other matter, Lacan, Derrida, and Foucault are important within French culture, in my view, because they are critiquing the Cartesian and rationalist heritage in France. You could not, in my view, it was absolutely illegitimate to export that to America, and particularly to be making many American students read those texts in English translation. I mean, especially the ones that are very labyrinthine already in, like Lacan, in French. Well, the problems that the post-structuralists are complaining about in France never were the case in America. We have never had, okay, this vampirish burden of a fine art or canonical tradition in America. For heaven's sakes, we're a frontier culture. There's no fine art tradition here. Okay, we've been trying to implant it. Okay, this is the culture that created Hollywood. Okay? And we are not rationalists. Right? The French language is extremely limited in the number of permissible words that go back to the plays of Racine and so on. So these arguments have. I mean, it was madness. Okay, on the part of American academics to bring these things over. The person who started it was Edward Said, whom I do admire. Okay, a man of great learning, a leftist, a member of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, you know, when he was first talking about Foucault, already saw the limitations in Foucault in his first writings on him. But these other academics who just went into it, I mean, there are academics who, I mean, any academic who says, oh, Foucault is so learned. Foucault is not learned. Anyone who thinks Foucault is learned, okay, does not know what true learning is, and they have not done their history lessons. There was a problem in American literary criticism. The new criticism had gotten too formalist and too focused on the individual text apart from biography or historical context. Okay, it was a reaction against the bibliographical excesses of an earlier generation. So what was needed was to supplement new criticism by bringing in historical context, history and psychology, because new criticism was also anti-Freud. I felt I was part of that movement to supplement, to bring it in. What these post-structuralists did, okay, was to abandon the whole thing. And in poetry, they can't read a poem, okay? They can't. This style of theory works only on narrative. It does not work on poetry, okay? So we have a bunch of Philistines, okay, and provincials who are teaching at very high cost humanities to our undergraduates, okay? And there is a desert landscape. I must keep on repeating in the elite schools. Okay, in the humanities, okay, it's not going to be cured. It's going to be another generation, okay, before we root out all of this theory that was such a dead end.
When we come back, we're going to be able to ask you some questions that our emailers have asked about Noam Chomsky, Michael Moore, Jacqueline Kennedy, and also take up a few of your critics.
Okay.
People like Molly Ivins, who have written, "The sweeping generalization is Paglia's signature. In fact, her work consists of damn little else." And also we'll take up Naomi Wolf, what she said about you. Paglia is the nipple-pierced person's Phyllis Schlafly, who poses as a sexual renegade, but is in fact the most dutiful of patriarchal daughters. And finally, we'll also get a list from you. People want to know some books that you might recommend they read. We'll be back in just a few minutes. We'll have 1 hour left with our guest, Camille Paglia.
I just think that the full range of Italian-American types has never yet been portrayed. There really is a kind of a condescension in the portrayal of working-class types in general by the film industry, not in the 1930s when people were closer to the working-class roots, but we have a kind of a liberal bourgeoisie that runs the showbiz from LA. Many of them now are refugees from Ivy League schools, which are I guess who would want to go there? These arenas of a kind of a desiccated WASP system. I think that is quite, you know, it's quite past. And so So, I mean, I think that African Americans also have good reason to complain about the swamping of American culture by gangster motifs from the streets. I think that it was very parallel, actually, I think, the kind of crisis of representation that is endured currently by African Americans and with the gangster style of hip-hop and Italian Americans. I think perhaps an alliance or a bridge could be made with groups in the African American community who are also concerned about the portrayals of African Americans.
One of the best expressions of the sort of equity feminism that I believe in was given by Claire Booth Luce. This event, as we know, is sponsored by the Claire Booth Luce Institute. Miss Booth was fair-minded, clear-headed, utterly candid, also elegant and gorgeous, but of course that's not important, but you can see for yourselves. Now here's how she summed up the mission of feminism. And I quote at length, because it's really one of my favorite quotes of all time. "It is time to leave the question of the role of women in society up to Mother Nature, a difficult lady to fool. You have only to give women the same opportunities as men, and you will soon find out what it is not in their nature, what is in their nature and what is not. What is in women's nature to do, they will do, and you won't be able to stop them. But you will also find, and so will they, that what is not in their nature, even if they are given every opportunity, they will not do, and you won't be able to make them do it." Now, I love that brief, eloquent statement. And I put it in an article some time ago, and the dissident feminist and brilliant scholar and social critic Camille Paglia saw this passage, and she wrote me that she found it, quote, absolutely awe-inspiring. It sums up the whole thrust of my adult career. And I was so happy about that, because it's not easy to impress Camille Paglia. It's very easy to be impressed and dazzled by her.
We're back live with Camille Paglia, Dr. Camille Paglia. Thank you for joining us for In Depth this month. And we're going to get right back to some of the criticism and the questions that people want to know. First of all, let's go to Molly Ivins. Her criticism, "Sweeping generalization is your signature. In fact, her work consists of damn little else."
Well, I think Molly Ivins had only read things I've written on op-ed pages. There are 800 pages long. I mean, she clearly did not read any of my other work, like Sexual Personae, 700 pages long, which is in enormous detail about great artworks and literary works. I'm very sorry, and I think I don't know if Molly Ivins regrets the viciousness with which she greeted my arrival on the scene. It's unfortunate, because I actually think the Texas feminists have a great style. I loved Ann Richards. I mean, I think that kind of talking, sort of straight from the hip way of talking, is is excellent. I mean, so I think that Molly Ivins said that like in the early '90s. Now she likes to pretend that she only attacks people in power. She never attacks civilians. I think she said everything. But there was no call for her to defame me in the way she had and it's a good example of because she's part of the inner feminist circle in this country. And here is a strong talking woman who should have liked and appreciated another strong talking woman, and just completely missed the fact that she and I have more in common than we have different.
Naomi Wolf, you are a nipple-pierced person's Phyllis Schlafly.
Well, Naomi Wolf and I had a very long culture war in the early '90s. Went on for years, and at this point she's married and is a mother and has evolved in her thinking about many things. But I criticized her severely in the early '90s because her book, The Beauty Myth, I thought was an atrocious mess. Okay, saying that beauty was something being cooked up by men and the sort of capitalism to keep women's self-esteem low. And I was one of the first voices in Sexual Personae in my lectures to talk about the need for aesthetics, and that in fact one of the distinguishing marks of the human race is a love of beauty, and that the creation of beautiful artifacts or the emergence of the beautiful person is a sign of advancing civilization, and that feminism had in terms of rejecting beauty as a male conspiracy, had set itself against culture. And the other thing was that Naomi Wolf was blaming anorexia on the media. And I said anorexia is coming mostly from these highly competitive pressure cookers of the white upper middle class families that send their children to the Ivy League, and that if she sees anorexia in her fellow students at Yale or when she was a Rhodes Scholar, then she should be looking at the family culture that produced it. Where's that coming from? I said it's not coming from the media. I think that is absurd.
Is obesity the same thing?
Well, I mean, the problem is that the problem with the media, the media is part of our cultural environment insofar as it projects images of women that are unrealistic. I mean, obviously, in the fashion magazines and so on, obviously this is a cultural problem that we need to address. But anorexia per se, I was denying was caused by the media. What the worst thing is, and Naomi was one of the first to comment on this in public too. The lengthening, okay, the actual, today we say through Photoshop technique, the elongations of images, okay, of actual living women, including known celebrities, okay, in magazines, so that there is no way that any human person not only could be that thin, but actually have legs that long as the ones we customarily see. I do feel that the current media environment in advertising and so on is toxic for young people, but I don't want to change the media. I believe in free speech. The media is protected under free speech. The feminists of those days, they want to wade into the media and censor, okay? I don't believe in that. I believe in education, in us supplying images from high art, okay? I want young people to see in grade school the great variety of female forms that have been glamorized through history. In fact, most cultures valorize, right, the opulent woman, okay? The heavy woman has always been seen as far more desirable than the stick-thin women of our urban industrial age. So the answer is not to censor the media and to carry on against the media. The answer is to reform education. Now, Naomi Wolf has apparently never, thanks to her Ivy League education, had never seen apparently, okay, the richness, okay, of the actual art historical tradition. Okay, I mean, and I know that's Susan Faludi is another example with a Harvard education. I thought, these are products of the Ivy League, and I felt when I was trying to discourse with these women how limited their actual background was. I thought, why have they not been given a truly humanistic? So when I go to England and talk to undergraduates at Oxford or Cambridge, women undergraduates, it's unbelievable the difference compared to our Ivy League students. These women are sophisticated. They know how to talk. They have a natural respect, okay, for the arts. Okay? And now what we have are these sort of tunnel vision kind of feminists, okay, who come out, who see the entire world in black and white, ideology of black and white, and men bad, women good, okay, men oppressors, women victims, and everywhere. Naomi is still kind of doing that, but we're no longer in a kind of a war about it. That was a slang match we were having in the 90s.
Do you not teach at an Ivy League school because you can't or because you don't want to?
I am persona non grata in most of American academia. If I'm invited to speak, it's never by the literature department, or very rarely by a literature department. It's usually by history department. It could be classics, anthropology, something like that. Because so much of my work is in those areas. It's abroad. Now I could leave. I love, first of all, an arts college environment is my natural place. So I was at Bennington, and I'm here. It is so stimulating to me in my work to have these apprentice artists committed apprentice artists in my classroom like this. It's just a constant. And I thank God I don't have to deal with all those prep school grads that on the Ivy League campus. But if I want to leave America, I could be teaching at all kinds of, lecturing and teaching at all kinds of major universities worldwide. Outside of America, I am seen as a writer. I'm really seen as a writer. Here they say, oh, she's that personality who's on TV, and people, feel they don't have to read my books. They sort of know everything about me, even though I've written like thousands of pages of, and done, all these decades of work and so on. So, but I don't want to leave America. I love America. My family came to America, and I want to make American education better. And I think the corner has been turned in American academe, and all the big fancy names of theory of the last 20 years are all in decline. They're all falling down, and people are turning back. Look at Harold Bloom's sudden resurgence. Okay, people can dismiss, oh no, Bloom doesn't speak for academe. Well, Bloom obviously has a vibe now, or the mass audience or the reading audience has a vibe with Bloom, and they now see him as this apostle and evangelist for high art at a time when the National Endowment for the Arts, certainly all those years, I mean, it's under good stewardship now, okay, but the National Endowment of the Arts certainly did everything in its power to trash the image of the arts, or to alienate it from from the mass audience. I mean, the arts need help. Okay, literature and art and humanities, they need help in this country. Education has become all about sentiment. Okay, young people are tutored in sentiment. You have to be tolerant, be nice. Now, don't say anything bad to so and so. You know, little Johnny was crying after you called him this or that, a wuss. Okay, and it's all turning into that. What is that? Daycare center stuff. No, I believe arts should be absolutely presented from the start. Not arts where people give them finger paints to do. No, I'm talking about history, art, history where everything is in chronology. Give them a time frame. When I put a timeline on the board, the kids look like their mouths hang open. They've never seen a timeline. Okay, they have no sense of anything. They don't know how to diagram a sentence. Okay, all the structure of education that was given to my parents' immigrant generation and to me, the quality of public education that I had in upstate New York and in Syracuse, New York, it's gone now. Okay, it's gone, and it's a scandal, absolute scandal.
Salt Lake City, your first up in this second segment. Go ahead.
Hi, Camille. I'm a big fan.
Oh, thanks.
One of the things that I've noticed in your work as a person who's written and sold a bit of comedy myself is a highly evolved sense of humor. How do you balance a sense of humor with the dry academic world?
Oh, thank you for that question. That's such a great question. You see, that's one reason why many people didn't take me seriously for a very long time. They thought, well, how can a deep person be funny? Okay, to them, comedy, doesn't go with it. So that's why Susan Sontag, for all those years, she would pose as a very deeply serious person. Okay, you can't see. Can you imagine either Simone de Beauvoir or Susan Sontag like a big belly laugh? No, I mean they obviously did it privately, but the image of the intellectual that had evolved, okay, the austere, hypercritical intellectual. I don't believe that. Okay, I believe like the Hindu gurus. Okay, are actually the aging masters and sages are actually very funny. Okay, they're funny. They're prankish. Zen masters are known to be prankish. So I mean, to me, comedy is a symptom of a balanced perspective on life. And people who are going around like gloomy gusses, okay, like in that Sontag style of intellectual, these people are suffering from something coming from their childhood, has nothing to do with the proper intellectual response to life. Right now, again, I'm coming from a working class background. It's like working class people actually have much more of an evolved sense of humor. Okay, they laugh much more heartily, okay, than middle class people do. There's a loss of physical and mental energy, I think, in that transition from the working class to the middle class, and I observed this happen, in my own family. That is, as we moved, as the next generation moved into the professions of teaching and law and so on. There's a kind of sobriety, this kind of Northern European sobriety that's expected of you. So I'm very prankish in person. In fact, in college, I was on probation for pranks.
For pranks?
Yes. Something like 39. I made a list, 39 pranks. They put me on probation because I love to make like surreal environments. I love to terrorize the anyone in authority, like the administrators of the dormitories. So there was one thing I did, like I staged a murder scene. One of the dorm came back to her room after a beer blast, and I had staged a thing with like red cough syrup for blood, and my envelope opener for the knife, and a chair tipped over, and people went and screamed. Another time I took the clocks. I found that the clocks could come off the wall in the dormitory. These large clocks. I went up on a chair, and I took them down, and I put them, 2 of them, into the twin beds of the counselors in my dormitory. So when they came back from the beer blast, I loved it. They came back, and the clock faces were tucked up with the sheets around their face in bed. They came in, they screamed, okay, and so on. And then the thing that finally, I think that they put me on probation, I had shaving cream, and I was going back from the shower, and I just put a big question mark in shaving cream on the resident advisor's door, which meant like question authority. Well, it removed the varnish from the door, okay? So that was it. I was on probation. So, but it was the 60s. It was when the yippies, were going to the stock exchange and throwing dollar bills off the balcony, going suey, suey. I mean, so it was like part of that spirit of the 60s.
What politician has the best sense of humor?
Today?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, who has a sense of humor at all today? I mean, in America? Oh my God.
I'll give you a chance to think about it a little bit. Charleston, South Carolina, you're next.
Camille.
Hi. Yeah.
You're hot. You're cute. I love you.
Thanks.
Listen, I have a question. I saw a statistic that was staggering that 4% of the American population, that being black males between 15 and 40 years old, commit about 60% of the crime in the United States. Mm-hmm. And And naturally, this follows that racial profiling, policemen who see these kind of statistics and deal with it on a daily basis are prone to look towards black males who create a lot of crime. After 9/11, I saw a lot of people interviewed, blacks particularly, who, and I paid closer attention to this, and they were asked, since 9/11, do you have a problem with someone of Arab origins or looks being closely scrutinized, racially profiled? And they had no problem with it whatsoever. And I thought this was a large hypocrisy. And I just wondered how you felt about racial profiling and those type of things.
Well, I think it's inevitable, that if police are in an inner city environment where there is a high concentration of African Americans, it will seem like they're racial profiling. I happen to witness very unseemly scenes in the 1980s when I would be traveling by car on the New Jersey Turnpike from Philadelphia to New York, and I saw that the troopers, or maybe they were just local police, had out of the car constantly, it seemed, whole African-American families who were standing under very dangerous conditions along the side of the road in a situation that I thought really was un-American. Okay, if indeed the troopers or local police felt there was reason to search the car of these particular African Americans, I believe that the cars should have been taken to a rest stop or to, off the. There seemed to me that there was a deliberate effort to humiliate and to intimidate other drivers. And that, of course, the reason that was happening is that there was such a drug run going on from Florida all the way to New York City. Okay, so the New Jersey Turnpike was a point of intervention because it's almost like a kind of alley. So I think that the questions about racial profiling, are legitimate ones. I think many African Americans driving cars, okay, feel that they're is the subject of excessive scrutiny, and I think they probably are right. So yes, obviously, I think where it's gone too far are in situations like you hear about. Like, for example, I was hearing recently on the radio the first reports about the shooting that happened in City Hall, where a councilman was murdered point blank with a gun. And in those first moments, it seemed as if the shooter was free. They thought that he had escaped and was somewhere either in the building or in the area. And so the alerts that went out over the radio, and I was listening to the the New York radio, the alerts never mentioned race. Now, because of that kind of censorship there. Now, it turns out that the shooter actually was himself cut down by a undercover policeman who was on the floor of the council chamber. But I think that there are ways that clearly, where our hypersensitivity to racial matters goes against logic, and there are other places where African Americans have very legitimate grievances, I think, in the public realm.
California, Moronga.
Hi. My name is Karine, and I'm calling in response to a comment that was made earlier regarding security in America and how voters are possibly going to lean towards Bush because of his policies and basically supporting the military. And actually, from what I'm experiencing when talking to people and so forth, people don't feel secure with Bush at all because he was in office 9 months, and we had 9/11. Mm-hmm. And personally, if I have a security system that fails me, after I put it in place, I would actually change that. Yeah. If it fails me and something happens to me, I would change. And another thing is. After 9/11, we went in the Taliban. We still haven't found Osama bin Laden, and basically Bush is tap dancing, and I don't feel secure personally about the whole security issue.
Thanks, California. Let's leave it at that. We got your issue.
Thank you. I agree with everything that the caller says. Yes, in my view, the $1 billion that is being poured into Iraq every week should be going to build up our own security infrastructure in this country. Our local emergency response teams are still inadequately trained and supplied. We have all kinds of security problems around chemical plants and nuclear plants in this country. I think that just, I could go on for 5 hours, I'm afraid, on the Iraq issue, but there is a tremendous waste of national assets, seems to me, on this adventure and with no end in sight.
Cranston, Rhode Island.
Yeah, I happen to disagree with you. The Carlyle Group, which is friends with George Bush, has risen from the number 5th military supplier to the number 1. Are you still there?
Yes.
Taking into consideration globalized fascism, when you put the when a few who want to impose total control on the many, then power has been centralized. If you take into consideration Homeland Security or the Patriot Act, or no support for free internet-based college educations, or the Bush's role in the 9/11 attacks, taking into consideration the CIA reports that the Bush family were friends with the Osama bin Laden's family, and that the CIA knew about these attacks prior to the attack on 9/11. Some of this information is available at Infowars.com.
Thanks, Cranston.
Well, you know, I mean, we can't just blame the Bush administration. I was vocal in the 1990s about the indifference, it seemed, of the Clinton administration to the first attack on the World Trade Center in 1993. I mean, I thought that people in the media dropped it also. I think the media bears an enormous responsibility for a lot of these problems. Right? In their, again, all absorption in domestic issues, their insularity, and the media also deserves tremendous blame for its limpness in the face of our build-up toward war last year. We never had a real national debate on the invasion of Iraq, and then the ultimate blame, the Democratic senators of my own party. Democratic senators laid down flat like Persian rugs and let everyone walk right over. We had no national debate on this question of war, and I think that the population, which seemed to by polling support the invasion of Iraq, was in fact misinformed about the potential consequences of this. And yeah, what a I mean, that whole region. Okay, anyone who reads anything about the history of that region, going all the way back to antiquity, has to fear this naive stepping into this problem from which I don't see any date of extrication in sight.
We have just 40 minutes left. Our emailers have been wild about asking you about different people.
Okay.
So if you could, I'd like just to run through some of the people they want to get your opinion on, and we'll go on. Condoleezza Rice.
I think she's a great mind. I really admired her for a long time, but I think she's a little steely and cold. Okay, I'm a little unnerved by someone with such an evident lack of personal relationships, sending families, representatives of families to fight and die in Iraq, and I'm afraid in recent weeks, it's apparent where she was kind of not willing to take responsibility for problems that came from her own office, that her star may be besmirched. But again, because I'm so interested in the idea of a woman president, I mean, I've asked Condoleezza Rice in the recent years, when I love the way she takes stage, the way she comes out for a press conference, she's able to handle the mic, handle the media. This is what we need. Okay, our first woman president should be studying Condoleezza Rice's manner. And plus, she's a very cultivated woman who is a master of the piano as well as an athletic woman. So I think she's a role model in so many ways.
Noam Chomsky.
Well, Noam Chomsky, has said some nasty things about me, so I'm going to try to take the high road, okay, about him. I think that his linguistics theories are overblown. Okay, I think that his theories have been a kind of fascism in academe. I don't think that he is a deeply learned person in the history of world languages. I think that he is someone who has a very distorted way of perceiving reality, and that he is one of the great anti-American voices who has been comfortably ensconced with this job that he didn't even apply for at MIT all those years. It's not even his field, okay, of foreign relations. I think he's I think he hallucinates a bit about foreign policy. On the other hand, let me just say this, okay, the Bush administration, by going into Iraq, has managed to vindicate, okay, Noam Chomsky's entire view, okay. So if there's one of the main criticisms I have of what's happened in Washington is that Noam Chomsky's views, which seemed absolutely delusional, now seem to have the ring of truth to them.
Matt Drudge.
Matt Drudge is one of the great independent voices of our time. I like him. The Drudge Report is the first thing I turn to when I go online. It's the last thing I turn to before I go offline. And if I'm on a long time, I'm on it four other times. Okay. This is the net. He is the web. Okay, he has put his, even though he's only putting links up there. Okay, what his choice of links, he's like an improvisational artist to me. It's like in the main line of Andy Warhol, who was a great to me role model for me too. His the almost poetic way, in free form way that he treats his site. Okay, is to me one of the unique experiences of our time. I really respect him. We don't agree on politics. I mean, he's like much more conservative in his thinking than me, but I think he is fabulous. At a time when the arts, the fine arts, are actually not producing anything particularly interesting, and have become it's sometimes rather bizarre with particularly these exhibitions that come from England where you have bisected cows, bodies on display and so on. I mean, I think Drudge is actually one of our best examples of a performance artist. And he's fabulous on radio. He's a master of radio. It's completely different than his website.
Phoenix, Arizona. Phoenix, are you there? Go ahead, Phoenix.
Yes?
Go ahead, sir. You're on the air.
Okay. Sorry. I wanted to ask Ms. Paglia a big and then a tiny smaller question. My main question is, in studying popular culture in relation to the Western canon, how do you expect students of your work or whoever's, how does that benefit their understanding of the canon? And also, because I actually think your work actually kind of sort of mythologizes the present. Mm-hmm. My second minor question is just, do you have any recommendations on writers? I really admired your Noah in the Arena. I'm gay myself, and I really deeply admired your, so many things had to be said there that you said. And anyone that has you recommend that that you find insightful in regard to homosexual, contemporary and otherwise.
Okay. All right. Wait. Yes. First of all, the overall theory holding together my work is this. Okay. That Judeo-Christianity never did defeat paganism, as the history books say, but rather that Greco-Roman paganism went underground during the medieval period and erupted at three key moments. One was the Renaissance. Most people would accept that was a revival of Greco-Roman humanism and artistic motifs and so on. The second eruption of paganism was Romanticism, where you had all this primeval stuff, which I call the chthonian, coming up from the earth, the daimonic, the occult, and all those things. And then the third great eruption of paganism is the age of Hollywood, which is what I call the 20th century. So that what we're getting in the pantheon of the I'm talking about the great studio era, where you had that deification of the stars and that incredible kind of manufacture of stars of the level of Dietrich, Harlow, and so on, Rita Hayworth, etc. So yes, I mean I feel that modern popular culture is the final term, okay, in this long story. Therefore, the wasteland view of things, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, 1922, saying that Western culture is in fragments, is in pieces, is collapsed. I said that is complete delusion. Okay, yes, maybe the fine arts tradition was collapsing into cubism, and I'm a great admirer of Picasso and so on. I don't mean to diminish cubism, but that whole kind of view, a pessimistic view of culture being at an end, of the West being over, okay, which we see even in Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot following World War II, which so influenced Foucault, and which is a play that Susan Sontag idolized and so on, a play that I absolutely abhorred from the moment I saw it in college. I said this bleak view of culture, of life, as nothing but an empty landscape with one poor tree trying to come back to life and a bunch of hobos chewing on chicken bones and no woman in sight, by the way, one of the great misogynist plays of all time. And I think that is not a view of culture. Instead, what was going on in Hollywood at that moment? Okay, fantastic entertainment. Okay, Hollywood supplied what modern avant-garde culture denied was possible any longer: emotion and beauty and the body. Okay, so that's why the mass audience gravitated toward popular culture. That's why when you get people like Naomi Wolf and others and other feminists, okay, who are always bad-mouthing, or Faludi, simply bad-mouthing the mass media, I say, get off these foreign theories, which they are all coming from the Frankfurt School of commodification and all that stuff. Okay, get off that and realize the degree to which that the working class and the mass audience, not only here but now worldwide, okay, has fed off these magnificent images. So I do see a continuity. I see continuity in the West going all the way down from the founding great works of literature and art into the great classic movies and so on. Okay, now there's a lot of trash in popular culture right now, which I certainly don't mean that young people should be absorbing a diet of trash. Now, what was the second part of the question?
We're going to get to that list. He has a list, but we're going to get a list of people you're going to recommend that people read. But we'll put that all together in a few minutes. Should government limit its support of the arts?
No, all right, government. Okay. Government support of the arts should be a given. It should be a given, and the minuscule amount that is given by the government. Now, but who is to blame, okay, for this declining amount? Okay, the arts community itself. Okay, by identifying its cutting edge, works with artworks that profane established religious values. Why should any taxpayer feel, okay, that he or she is underwriting something like Andre Serrano's Piss Christ, where you had a crucifix submerged in a beaker of the artist's urine? Now, there's a lot to be said for avant-garde transgressive art. I could give a whole lecture on it.
You're a big Mapplethorpe fan,
I love Mapplethorpe. I love Mapplethorpe. Right? But the idea that the government needed to support Mapplethorpe at that time, okay, when he was already rich, okay, from his own works, he was not a struggling artist at the time of that. So I wrote an essay actually for Tikkun magazine that's collected in Sex, Art, and American Culture, where I said I adore Mapplethorpe. In fact, I wrote an homage to his great portrait of Patti Smith from the cover of Horses for Civilization magazine. I love Mapplethorpe, and I love everything transgressive about him. Nevertheless, that's not the whole history of art. Not all art has been transgressive. The whole oppositional view of art is simply a heritage of Romanticism. Since the late 18th century and early 19th century, most of art for human history has been celebratory of power. It has always been that. The church, gave money for a celebration of its values. The government or princes, the Medici princes, gave money for celebration of themselves. The pyramids, most of the history of art has been propaganda, underwriting by the powerful and the rich. It's true. Nevertheless, the workmen, the artisans, produce fantastic objects that are part of the cultural heritage of everyone in the world. I come from an Italian culture, okay, where it's assumed by the peasant in the field, my people, okay, that from whom I came, that the operas are their heritage, that Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling is their heritage. There's no sense that it belongs to an elite, all that stuff. So what's happened in this country, okay, is the way the arts community itself managed to shoot itself in the foot, okay, like that when they brought the Saatchi collection over to the Brooklyn Museum of Art, okay, and in this, there's nothing of any religious consequence or reference in the whole exhibition, except for one thing, and that is this Madonna figure by a Nigerian-British artist named Chris Ofili, where you had the elephant dung being used for her breasts and little cutouts of women's genitalia from pornographic magazines, right, pasted all around her. That's the part that the liberals in defending this often leave out. Now, I could give a lecture on that, explaining what he meant by that in terms of traditional African fertility religion and so on. I mean, there are many potential meanings there. Now, at the Brooklyn Museum, what a bunch of coconuts. I mean, they knew what was going to happen. They wanted a sensation. They wanted to offend Catholic sensibilities. Okay, they love the Catholic Church. Is like you can say anything against the Catholic Church. Okay, but anything about Judaism or Islam for many years was completely impossible. Okay, so the Brooklyn Museum should have realized there was going to be this and supported in some way by possibly having a whole, maybe either brochure or something before you enter the exhibition about the history of transgressive art, the history of objects that offend, okay, established taste, or something to give the whole thing context, right? And then we wouldn't have had the explosion that you did. Then Rudy Giuliani waded into it, okay, with by trying to cut off support to the Brooklyn Museum. So what I'm saying is, the reason that we have this pathetically small budget for the arts in this country, okay, is because of the arrogance with which the arts community has conducted itself by saying to the mainstream audience in America, we're about spitting on you, taking your money and spitting on you. Now, what kind of art teaching, what kind of art education can go forward with that kind of attitude?
Ocala, Florida.
Hi, Doctor. I was listening to your words, and you mentioned intellectual a few times. Now, I come from a blue-collar background, just a high school graduate. Now I'm a very successful businessman. I looked up intellectual in the dictionary, and it says irrational as opposed to emotional. And my question is hypothetical. Now, might does not make right, but throughout history, it seems that men have run the world due to their physical aggressiveness as opposed to the submissiveness of women. Now, when it comes to feminism, does it hold true that feminism would not exist except for the benevolence and the tolerance of men, and feminism is actually one collective aggressive stroke away from extinction?
Well, I think feminism is permanent. It goes through phases. I mean, there are times when it seems to surge and then subside again. But actually, feminism is a part of the West's legacy. You know, when so many people on campus and PC campuses, badmouth Western culture, for heaven's sakes, feminism and indeed the entire concept of civil liberties is a product of Western individualism. It goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. Now, feminism itself, we can trace. There are feminist expressions at various points by isolated women from the medieval period on, probably, but it really has its roots just following the period of revolutions in the late 18th century, after the French Revolution and in the American Revolution, and you began to get women like Mary Shelley, who was the daughter of a very prominent feminist, who want to achieve the same level of men. But yes, insofar as the modern capitalist industrial revolution produced a system that allows women to escape from the drudgery of housework and to be freed from dependence on either a husband or a father, to sustain themselves. In some way, yes, feminism is a product of male achievements, and there have always been two strands in feminism. There is a kind of puritanical strand. What's often covered up is that many of the founders of feminism in the women's suffrage movement of the 19th century were ardent prohibitionists, wanted to stop the public sale of liquor because they felt that liquor was something that caused problems at home, that men drank up the family income on gin and then abused and beat their wives and abandoned their children and so on and so forth. And so then there's a kind of pro-sex or libertarian or sort of extreme and extravagant theatrical strand in feminism that I kind of belong to, and that goes back to Victoria Woodhull. And so there's been an argument even within feminism, and now and then one part of the movement has kind of dominance, and then the other one comes back. So I was part of the pro-sex part of it in the 1960s, and all of a sudden the doors were shut in my face. For many reasons. I love the Rolling Stones. I was told the Rolling Stones are sexist. I thought that hormones play a part in sexual identity. I was told that this was all nonsense, et cetera, et cetera. So the entire pro-sex wing of feminism lost ground throughout the 70s and 80s, but we made this enormous resurgence again in the 90s, and I think that it's a pro-man, respectful of men and heterosexual relationships. I think it's that kind of strident feminism that you're thinking about of the 80s, of the early 90s. I think it's that's pretty much gone.
Redmond, Washington.
Hello. I am a mother who's homeschooling my son, and I'm very interested in a curriculum that would help him understand the arts in the world. So do you have any suggestions?
Can I just peg on to that? An emailer who wants to know how do you deal with, how do you treat a kindergartner in order to make them a free thinker? Let's put both of those two together. Well, since you'll have to face this. Well,
it's true. In terms of the arts, I mean, I think it's so important to expose the child to images. There are some huge, like one-volume history of art books that are often used in freshman college years that are there's a famous one by Jansen called History of Art. My parents had a book by Gombrich that was the story of art that began with the earliest cave art things and moved all through the periods. And I think it's never too early to introduce the child to images. Now, one of the problems is that many images from the history of the Western tradition are nudes. Okay? So I think that each family has to make a decision to the degree to which you think that children should be looking at nudes or not. I believe that as the children in Europe, European kids are used to seeing nudity everywhere, and that it hasn't caused a personal corruption. I think that where possible, that the child should be taken to a museum. My parents took me from upstate New York to visit the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, and it was this mind-boggling experience on me. I must have seen the museum when I was 3 or 4 years old. Mind-boggling to see the magnitude of the great stone sphinxes of Queen Hatshepsut that are there, and see these magnificent paintings. I mean, unfortunately, smaller galleries and smaller towns tend to be more contemporary art. But I think to encourage the child to study the image, because today with movies and TV, everything is moving too rapidly. Okay, but the art of examining a complex work, okay, and really looking at it. I mean, and so many of the great classic works of the medieval period and the Renaissance and the Baroque are on religious topics. So I think that even very conservative families who feel that they don't want nudity in the images they show their children can certainly help discuss with the child, okay, some of the great masterpieces of with biblical stories from the Sistine Chapel ceiling and so on. But I think that you need to go to the library. You don't need to buy books. I mean, all these things are available in the library. And I think that if the child has to have your encouragement, and I certainly was encouraged to treat art seriously by my family.
Another couple more people from the emails. Jackie Kennedy.
Well, I wrote actually a piece on Jackie Kennedy. I thought what a classy woman she was. I thought she had such elegance and refinement. I really, admired her. I loved the way she held herself, which is a part of the heritage of being trained when you're riding horseback, and so on. So she had this wonderful quality, and I think part of the great tragedy is the more we learn about what was really going on, the way she was personally undermined by the extent of the philandering by her husband. I think that even the legacy of his administration is starting to suffer from that. And I feel bad about it because I think that the Kennedys, both of them, lit a fire and an appetite for political participation in my generation. I will never forget the ecstasy I felt at John Kennedy in 1960. After the somnolence of the Eisenhower years, the image of woman that Mamie Eisenhower was a very nice lady, but she was no Jackie Kennedy. So they have this like style and vitality and this sort of forward thinking and articulateness. Oh, John Kennedy. Oh, his articulateness in the press conference. So they were a wonderful combination.
Michael Moore.
Well, okay, I agree with him about politics, probably about many things. Okay, but I must deplore and condemn the methods he's using to fictionalize productions that he is claiming are documentaries. Okay, so insofar as he was guilty of restaging a scene involving a rifle at a bank as part of his lobby, I think that there's no room for that. There's no room for dishonesty at the New York Times or in Hollywood. And so I wish that Michael Moore would stop using tactics of defamation and deceit as part of his political agenda.
Dr. Laura Schlesinger.
Well, Dr. Laura is, I mean, if I happen to be in the car and I get her on the radio, I always enjoy listening to her. She's tough. She's a tough cookie. But I think there's something over the years, maybe a little bit too brittle about her presentation. I mean, she basically thinks that you all can just pull yourself up by your bootstraps out of life, and this is the way to do it. And I think that there's not enough room, there's not enough relaxation, there's not enough room for comedy, shall we say, in her presentation.
Next is Toledo. Hello, Toledo.
Hello. Admire Dr. Paglia, and I've seen her many times. By the way, I graduated from Berkeley in the late 60s.
Oh.
And became very liberal, of course, and had a great education there. And then I got my first job and got a paycheck and found out how much taxes I was paying. And that changed my mind a bit. But on education, I must tell you, I just met a young lady accidentally in a restaurant the other day, and she graduated high school with an A average. And we just talked while we were waiting for our tables, and she said, have you traveled a lot? And I said, yes. And she said, where have you been? And I said, well, most recently, England. And she said, what language do they speak there? Now, this is really a commentary on what the doctor has said several times during the day. What do you feel about school vouchers? And secondly, I think, by the way, on another matter, you personify sexiness.
Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. I can't, even in my declining years. Okay, yes, vouchers. Well, I support the vouchers. I support anything which can throw a bomb into the calcified public education system, can release it from its just the terrible enslavement it has by the teachers' unions at the present moment. I think there's been just a tragic decline. I mean, there's every kind of idiocy. I mean, I think if there was, remember, there were legal attempts to stop, even experiments in having high schools in the inner city that were all males, okay, because it was thought that if you could just, and I agree with that, when you have kids, troubled kids, all kinds of experiments that could be done if we could just free up the education system from the social engineers among us. But our problem, your very parochial interlocutor there at the restaurant, yes, it's a terrible problem. America is an enormous country that is the size of it's like of several Europes. I mean, we have states, okay, that are larger than Europe itself, and Europe is like such a patchwork of languages and cultures, and there's and also international connections around the world. The connection between India and Britain is intense. So in America, we're very insular, despite the enormity of the country, and efforts have to be made by educators to open up the minds of the students to the great world that's out there, but not in this kind of multiculti way that says, oh, all the peoples of the world are this great peaceful nation, and the only evil people in the world are the Americans. There would be a wonderful paradise on earth if it wasn't for evil America. That's the way they're taught. They're taught all this, okay, etc. Right? I think that most of public education, and including college these days, is a waste of time, a tremendous waste of time. Kids are madly bored. I think there should be much more development, a return to trade schools where kids are learning something. I think that every single course that's being taught has to be evaluated in terms of what the kids are getting. I think the kids need help with learning how to housekeep. The old home economics thing was thought hopelessly, outmoded, and that kind of thing. People need how to balance a checkbook. Kids aren't learning things at home. I think minorities need help with business and how to manage small businesses to give them a leg up, whereas people from the upper middle class could learn things about investments in the stock market from their family. People from the working class don't. I mean, the utter emptiness of so much public education these days, right? The frivolity of it, okay? The mediocrity of it in America is shocking to the mind. I'm in favor of kids not going directly into college, but actually, if their families can afford it, sending them abroad. Take that money, and send them abroad. Have them return to college later. Have more adults returning to college. We need much more interplay of ages. Okay, I think that the social pressures in high school are terrible right now. They're just to keep on graduating kids in this like big group of the age group up like that, and of course you can't keep them back. Oh, heaven forbid, they can't read or write. Don't keep them back. We have to have social promotion, or they'll suffer psychologically, even though they can't read and write. You just graduate them without reading and writing skills, etc., etc. I think we need much more a mixing of ages in schools, and I think that we have to free people from the tyranny of school. I think one reason I thought that for the Columbine massacre, okay, was that you have boys penned in school, penned. Okay, their physical energies need to do something. Okay, find something for them to do. And then we infantilize the kids. Okay, they can't buy liquor. Oh no. Okay, so because they can't buy alcohol till they're 21, they're all taking every kind of weird drug. Okay, that is like, I mean, from special K, animal tranquilizer to ecstasy. They're pickling their brains. I mean, we have a whole pickled brain generation moving forward. Alcohol, at least, you're violently sick if you overdo it, but it evacuates. It's gone from the system by the next day. We're producing unsophisticated, okay, kids with minds of jello, okay, who are uneducated, who can't find England, obviously, on the map. People couldn't find Iraq on the map also, okay. That's what really got me about last year, okay, where we were being forced into a war, okay, where most Americans wouldn't have the remotest idea where Iraq was. I mean, or any sense of the history of Mideastern politics, or the idea that the British Empire had made this mistake before getting into Iraq, following the cutting up of the Ottoman Empire after World War I.
St. Louis, Oregon.
Hi.
Hi.
Doctor, and speaking of pickled brains, I'm interested in your opinion on this. Thinking of Pat Schroeder and what she accomplished with others in the Congress and military, I certainly oppose women in military when it comes to combat positions and things. Certainly women in the military have a very big place, and it should get bigger. But I have a huge problem with that. If I could say one other thing about, if I remember Gulf War I, there were a lot of women, I guess, in reserve units that went, and afterwards, the military didn't want this out, but there was a huge number that became pregnant while they were there, or others that after 6 months had to go home for one reason, because of maternal reasons. I have a hard problem with women, even at the service academies, because it does come down to a combat type situation. I'd be interested in her opinions and on the subject.
When I gave a lecture at West Point, I got an earful about that from a number of the cadets. I think maybe the jury is still out about women in combat. Women have not actually ever served in combat, even as I understand it, in the Israeli army. They're not really on the front lines. The thing is, in our modern military, of course, when you have such advanced technological machinery, when you have women jet pilots can certainly, it seems to me, serve extreme as well as men probably, if they're able to pass the test without any lowering of the standards for women, as was done in cases of admission of women to fire in some fire companies, local fire companies, but. I think honestly, it's still not known to what extent would women's presence in a combat unit compromise cohesion. I'm willing to have an open mind about it. I'm perfectly willing, as a feminist, to say, all right, this is one area where perhaps it's not working to have women. But unfortunately, this argument also crosses over to gays in the military, and the idea that that gays should be drummed out of the military because their presence too would break down cohesion in situations where you have the soldiers literally sleeping on top of each other and under conditions where you might have the temperature 20 below or something like that. All these questions are they're very thorny ones. We haven't been in a war to test it for very long. I certainly agree that the military should not be a laboratory for social engineering, and I think that is what happened in the 1990s, where people were trying to enforce social policy, trying to force culture changes ahead, when in fact the military is our fighting arm. We're going to depend on. I oppose any kind of misuse of the military for any reasons, as now in Iraq, where our brilliantly trained military is being used for police duties for which it is ill-equipped, and our soldiers are not just being killed. Okay, the figures are, of course, the media as usual is suppressing. They're not just being killed. Our soldiers are being wounded. Okay, they're with like a loss of limbs. Okay, people are not going to be able to walk for the rest of their lives and so on. And all of that is being kept from us right now. So yeah.
Cheltenham, Pennsylvania.
Yes, hello?
Go ahead.
Hi. This is the first time I've ever heard about you. I'm sorry, but I'll get some of your books in the future. Oh. You're very interesting.
Thank
I'm
you.
a school nurse, and presently I like to know two things. What do you think of the Democratic Party, again, not, taking the black vote for granted and just going on about their business? And, they don't have the White House and they don't have their Congress. Is it going to happen to them again if they ignore the black vote? And also, what do you think about liberal arts in America? The black African Americans have been protesting or been saying with loud voices to include African American studies into the liberal arts programs and so forth and so on. And of course, that sector would not allow it, at least not at the level of what African Americans want.
Thanks, Pennsylvania.
Well, number one, it's interesting. I think that the only enjoyable person to watch right now is Al Sharpton, okay, who's the only person who dares to be speaking out. All the other Democratic candidates are very constrained by their focus groups and their advisors. They almost seem like they're walking mummies. They can't actually be totally honest about their real views on any issue. So we'll see what's going to happen. I think it would be a very big wake-up call to the Democratic Party if there's a split in, if Al Sharpton takes his votes and moves with them. I voted for Jesse Jackson actually in the 1988 presidential primary just because I wanted to. I want more candidates of color and more women at the top level, and so we're just not getting them. I think it's something really wrong in terms of there are many, it seems to me, African American candidates at the local level, at the level of state government, and so on, even in the Congress, and they really, we need to bring them forward more. Now, in terms of this is one of the things that happened actually in the Academy in the last 25 years. First the African American Studies departments, and then there'll be the Latin American Studies departments, and so on. That was a process of kind of splintering that occurred in the humanities that I don't think was in the best interest of the humanities overall. Certainly, it got African American issues much more into the curriculum in college and also at the high school level. I was happy to hear that the Harvard Department of African American Studies is now going to move more toward the African direction, start to stress the African side, the question of African history, African languages. That's what I felt is much more necessary. But unfortunately, I don't like any kind of fragmentation in the humanities. I don't want a situation where you say, well, black teenagers should only be taught African American culture. I think that's terrible. I think that black teenagers should not just read African American literature. Okay, they should be exposed to the whole of the history of the arts.
Seattle.
Yes. Hi, Dr. Paglia.
Hi.
Let me say at the start that I like you, and you got to be the most interesting woman I've ever seen on TV.
Oh, thanks a lot.
And I've seen you at other occasions on.
Oh, are you there, caller?
Oh, lost the caller.
Caller, are you there?
Oh.
I'm sorry, we lost him.
Oh dear.
That's too bad.
Oh, boy.
I apologize.
No.
Let me go through your books.
Sure.
What will people find in Sexual Persona?
Sexual Persona is a view of the whole history of Western culture that begins with cave art, moves into ancient Egypt, into Greece, and down to Italian art, and so on. And then it goes into literature. It tries to show what are the fundamental themes in Western literature. Now, and I wrote it in a way that should be accessible to the general reader, so give people a sense of history.
Vamps and Tramps.
Vamps and Tramps is a collection of my essays on a huge variety of topics. That's my second essay collection, actually. It contains the big essay, No Law in the Arena, is my social and political philosophy, and then it has a wide variety of essays on the Clintons and on all kinds of other things. It has the program I did in England about the penises in art, as well as transcripts of videos I did, like with drag queen Glenda Orgasm, okay, whose real name is Glenn Belverio in New York. It's a documentary I did, and all kinds of things are in there.
Sex, art, and American culture.
It contains my initial articles on Madonna, on date rape. It has the big essay, Junk Bonds and Corporate Raiders, which is my long attack on contemporary campuses.
And The Birds.
The Birds, okay, is a book the British Film Institute asked me to contribute to this series, and this book apparently is one of their most popular. It is a scene-by-scene analysis of this great masterpiece by Alfred Hitchcock. It is it's written for the general reader. It is meant, when you start, it's every possible interesting little detail about the movie, about the sets, the costumes, and so on, but as you read it, the movie should unfurl in front of your eyes. It starts from the beginning, and so it's a great book for the train. Okay, you'll feel you have seen the entire movie from beginning to end, moving in front of you.
Mariana Torgovnik, do you know her?
She was someone who once had a reputation at Duke University and is now on the margins of, I believe.
This is what she wrote about you. She
Yes.
said, I suspect that Paglia is going to be true to her past in ways she does not even suspect. That she's going to end up disappointing and alienating everyone, including her current backers, that she's going to self-destruct. Paglia may surprise me, she's done it before, but I'm afraid she'll keep talking when she has nothing more to say.
Well, here it is 10 years later. There are so many people in the early 90s, they say, oh, she's having her 15 minutes of fame. Well, it's like 13 years later, and, and I'm still here. Yeah, a lot of those ladies who were like big wheels in academia, when I came out, ooh, they were mad. I came on the scene like an explosion. They thought, well, who is she? Who is she? Well, who is she? Okay, I was someone who was like totally unpublished, okay, who was struggling for most of my career, and I wrote a 700-page book, which, by the way, that woman has never read, okay, and Molly Ivins never read it, and Naomi Wolf has never read, okay. So all these people who think they know so much about me, they've never read the masterwork, which is Sexual Personae. They know nothing.
Well, we know more about you than we did 3 hours ago. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for the invitation.
Camille Paglia, our guest on In Depth this month. Thanks for joining us.